Cover it up.
So wait, so turtles versus dolphins? I haven't heard of this case.
Oh, it's not a case.
Can you cite it for me?
Not yet.
We're working on it. It hasn't quite reached that heated of an issue yet, to where it's got to get.
Roe v. Wade. This is the case of the century right now, coming up.
Maybe. I don't know how the legal system works in these countries that have granted humans like sort of dolphins like non-human citizenship, but maybe they can be represented in the court system. Maybe there just needs to be some activist group.
This is a relatively new century, though. If we're being fair, like we're only 22 years in, so
Discord just
plenty of time.
That would actually be really interesting if one country like registered like a non-human as a citizen, and then that animal traveled to a different country. That would actually be so interesting. Like imagine if, like a dog is registered as a citizen in like Canada, then the dog comes to America and someone kills it, and they get charged like animal cruelty.
I thought you were
Canada
going to
wants to like extradite them. But then, like, Canada wants to extradite them for, like, murder of a person. That would actually be so interesting.
That'd be a fucking horrible idea. Cause an international fucking incident over citizenship of an animal versus, like, people.
I do want to make one thing clear, though, in regards to the animals. There's not a dog in the world that I would lose a 1v1 to, in life or death, assuming, like, I'm not disabled, right? If I don't get my hands tied behind my back, there's not a dog in the world I can.
You're a fucking liar. You are a fucking liar. I will sick a pit bull on you right now.
Weaselly little liar, dude.
Listen, I'm just saying the dog.
Stick one on you.
I'm not saying the dog's not gonna get in some good things, some good bites here and there. All right, I might lose the arm in the aftermath. Okay, but in terms of like killing 1v1, not a dog in the world.
Killing a pit bull.
Checks out.
Rip your fucking larynx out.
It's all about those first few moments. You know, you got to get your fingers in those eyes immediately. You got to gouge those things out. It's your only chance.
I don't want to scare you too much there, Flow Trace, but I use my dogs, and we've celebrated with piñatas before, so I think you may have met your match.
He's dying, bro. He's getting eaten. He is getting eaten by whatever dogs you got.
I spent at least 30 hours debating this with my friends. I've got a plan. I've got a system in place. Okay.
That's fair. Everybody's got a plan.
I got a rot, and you could go try your plan against my rot and tell me how that works out for you. I have a feeling it's not going to be a good day.
Friends, thanks for coming. We can discuss the efficacy of fighting against canines at a later date. We're still waiting on one more person, and speak of the devil, she has appeared. Excellent. Now the council has gathered. We have all assembled, and the ritual can begin. First of all, to my audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with that the little pre-stream banter that we had, and to my guests, I really appreciate you being here as well. We have a very interesting topic today, and I know that you guys have all sorts of things to do. I don't want to take up too much of your time today, so we're just going to jump right in. I'll introduce the topic, and then we'll go around. You can introduce yourself and give an opening statement, and then we'll just kind of get into it. I think all of you have been on my show before. Alpha hands if you want to talk. And we'll get into it. So, the prompt. Let me find it. Okay. Protesting is a fundamental right in America. But why do we protest? Is it effective? Is it okay to protest in front of government officials' houses? Are there limits to what we should allow when protesting for a cause? What should they be, if any? And I want to tackle this from both a legal standpoint and an ethical standpoint. So not just what is legal, but what is right, if that makes sense. So we're going to start with Flow Trace, and then we'll just go around the room. Please.
Hey, guys. Sorry, my mic just fell. Hey, guys. My name is Flow Trace. You can check me out at twitch.tv/flowtrace and twitter.com/flowtrace_. I'm going to be coming here pretty hot with a very controversial opinion. Protesting good, rioting bad. Protesting usually represents an excessive emotional motivation, and that's okay. There are things that you ought be excessively emotionally motivated about. I think the only danger when it comes to protesting is, number one, the idea that this can often descend into rioting, and number two, that fundamentally this excessive emotional motivation, I think, can take us to places that are not helpful or not useful. beyond just becoming excessively motivated and rioting. I think you often see, not the most defendable positions coming out of these kinds of movements. I think defund the police is a great example, where this is something where there's some real concerns that are descriptively true. There are things that we need to be doing, but then when you come out with a solution like defund the police, that really hamstrings any sort of progress. And yeah, that's all I believe.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have half-baked takes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Wick, for having me back on. I'm going to make it short and sweet. Yes, it's okay to protest. We have celebrated that right forever, but it is not okay to protest in front of Supreme Court justices' houses to affect a ruling. I think that is wholeheartedly different. I'm curious to see where this conversation goes, because if we're just talking about protesting, I think most people in this fucking panel are going to agree, hey, protesting is good. But when we start talking about it allowing the influence of justices, then there'll be some disagreement. So I'm excited to get there. Thank you, Wick, for having me out.
Well, I'm excited to have this topic with you, and I'm glad you're here. Next up, we have Jason Society, please.
Hello, I am Jason Society, Jason_Society on Twitch. I host the Stonercast on Sundays. My opinion on this is that, number one, protesting is always good. I think it's a useful tool in the tool belt of many things that we can do to affect change in our society. I don't, because of the nature of the position of the Supreme Court justices, and because the fact they have a lifetime position on the Supreme Court, I do think it's a little bit different. I don't necessarily have an issue with protesting in front of their houses, because they're going to be on the court for the rest of their lives. There's no other redress we have for these folks. There's literally nothing else we can do. So I have no problem with protesting out in front of their houses. I do think that when you get to the point of violent riots, that's usually problematic. However, even King said, riot is the language of the unheard, so are people not being heard? You got to remember, we're about to take, the Supreme Court's about to take millions of people's rights away as far as their autonomy goes. And yeah, rightfully so, they're going to be pretty upset about it. So I also think it's dependent upon the issue and, what we're talking about. I think some issues, yeah, like this, yeah, absolutely. I think you go full bore, like whatever you got to do. But I would hope that people keep it peaceful. I would hope that they don't harm anybody or cause any property damage or anything like that. That said, yeah, go for it. Have at it, Haas. I mean, they signed up for this when they joined the Supreme Court. It's on them.
Well, thank you for being here, Jason Society. A pleasure to have you, and we'll get into it soon. Lactoid, Bane of Leftists, go ahead.
Yep, Lactoid, Bane of Leftist, Milk Lawyer. You can find me on Anti-Communism United Discord and Twitch. So I got a little thing written out just about what my overall position is. It's a little bit complex. So, generally speaking, the ability to protest is an indicator of a free society. The fact that we get the freedom of movement to go somewhere and the freedom of speech to voice our concerns is part of what makes this country great. That said, there are limitations. Like someone said before, when a protest turns into a riot, it is no longer an expression of freedom, but on an individual level, a violent assault or property damage, which we wouldn't accept in other contexts. So it makes no sense why we would accept it here. Intimidation, while not true violence per se, I think is still unacceptable. I can't use my free speech to make a bomb threat because this is an intent to action. And I also can't scream outside your house while you try to sleep, because although you may have the right to scream in public, when you invade my most sacred private property with your presence continually, my interest in my own property needs to be considered as well. This is why I'm not usually okay with protesting in front of government officials' private residences, and I don't support it in the case of the Supreme Court. We can't have a society where I get pissed off at my neighbor and then I can go stand outside their door and chant at them all night, right? It's just not something we can do. There's also the question here of how much of this is intimidation. What message is being sent by targeted protesting outside of someone's private residence, not where they enact policy, but where they sleep, where their children may live. Ultimately, it is a gray area, and it may be especially difficult to draw lines in urban areas where people's homes are right there on the public avenue. But ultimately, I think my opinion rests on the difference between targeted harassment and free expression. As long as your aim is free expression and not targeted harassment, then I think protest is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
If the aim
Smash.
here
That's
is
my
targeted
issue with it.
harassment,
Is
then
like
it's not acceptable.
the
I think it's
the
clear
level
what the motivation
of,
is in the
removal of
case
civil rights that
Supreme
we're
Court
talking about
justices. I think they are
is
targetedly
one
they're
that's
harassing them.
reprehensible.
That's the intent of these protests. So I'm not in favor of it.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Always happy to have you. Second time on my show, and hopefully as good as the first time. Professor Meat, someone who's been on here a lot. Please.
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty short. A lot of stuff has been said already. I don't want to get too much into like responding to particular arguments, of course, being an open statement. So I'll just say, yeah, protest is interesting. A lot of the time, people try to justify certain ethical arguments around the need for protest. The quote by Martin Luther King that's already been mentioned here on the panel is often evoked in this context. But loosely speaking, especially if we're talking about what's effective, we're in this new age where protesting interacts with the public domain in ways that it didn't before. And in a certain sense, political motivations, political change seems to be primarily motivated by a sort of market of ideas in a big and to a large extent, especially to the extent in the ways that certain positions are advocated for in our society. And so, given that that is the case, it just seems to me that what gets missed a lot of the time in these conversations is that an effective protest is not so much, it seems to me, a justification for a possibly unethical action, as it is the case that unethical and ethical actions, the ethical qualities of your protest, often are what determine its efficacy. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Hey, thank you. We do have one more person to replace Top Dolphin. They're jumping in now, so we'll have a full panel. Not Eli Monty wanted to get on in this, so the extreme lefties here will have some
bring
backup.
Yep.
Redheaded man, please.
Hi guys. So I kind of work in the political sphere as a policy advisor. So this, in a sense, is a huge feeder for what we try and look for in policy and how it kind of gets made, delivered, and then sent out and understood by politicians. We're in a very different age, as Professor Mead had kind of previously said. I don't know if him and I are going to have the same ideas, but I'll kind of give it a little justification as to what has happened as of currently in this day and age. What we have seen is kind of an advancement, or excuse me, a abandoning of what we would know as town halls. For instance, here in my state of Nebraska, our currently elected senator hasn't had a town hall, a meeting in which you go and meet with your constituents face to face, in about 6 years, I believe. So when we talk about the effectiveness of protests, you have to have politicians that aren't recluses, right? You have to have politicians that are, in a sense, reachable, unless they believe themselves to be in safe districts where they don't have to kind of appear in front of their constituents. They still take letters, calls, and all that jazz. So it's a very good question as far as what is protest going to look like now for effectiveness, and what is it going to mean actually for us morally in our ability? Has that been abandoned by our politicians?
Okay, thanks for being here. Haven't seen you in a while, Redheaded man, so
Yeah, man.
glad to have you back. Next up, we have Ninetails, please.
Hi, Ninetails Cosmic Fox here. I'm on Twitch, so it's all one word, Ninetails Cosmic Fox. Lefty streamer who, like a total dork, wrote my own intro, so I'm going to sound like such a nerd, okay? So just bear with me, okay, everybody? Sometimes I write my own intros. So first I need to clarify that talking about the means of putting pressure on the state is not an endorsement for violence, as pressure on these things isn't simply a measure of how much violence one uses. It is a complex front with complex approaches defined by a collective creating pressure using organization and strategies who should also be subject to collective responsibilities for the actions they call for. Speaking generally here, a lot of people have negative views of rioting and protest, but they rarely stop to ask where it comes from. Their typical generalization is that it comes from people who are intrinsically violent, and it might, especially the rioting, and it might be that way, especially in individual cases. But it seems like nobody is willing to blame the state for these conditions. The status quo teaches us to see things through the lens of the ruling class interests, so that protests using direct action become about abstract damage to you as a respectable civilian. It never talks about the very real damage that probably caused people to feel this way right now, and what made them feel like it's the only way to solve their own problems and fight for their rights. So what if, as a general rule, we consider this as a reciprocal force to the violence that the state puts on the people it marginalizes, which isn't even a small tent once we consider the effects of capitalism. If we consider ourselves to be a free country and people, then why are we insisting on believing that people fighting the state for their rights are simply violent or selfish? This is how freedoms for the non-ruling class have been established. So if anything, this should be like a basic human right that I believe we treat with the same level of immunity as freedom of speech. So let's just be real. If you're a Supreme Court justice, then not only can you handle being targeted, but it's safe to assume that you're safe. The more power you hold, the more accountable to the people you should be.
Yeah, nobody's hurting these Supreme Court justices.
Thank you, Ninetales.
You know, they've got security up the wazoo. So
I appreciate you being here and appreciate your perspective.
I had to trim out like 10 different things to make that short enough.
It was still pretty long, but it was good. It was good. Last but not least, we have a late addition to the panel. So hopefully you're familiar enough with the prompt. We're talking about protesting. We're talking about protesting in front of Supreme Court justices' houses. We're talking about, are they effective? Do you have any opening thoughts, or do you want to just kind of jump on in when we go into the discussion?
I'll go ahead and give an opening thought. So generally, yes, I think it is absolutely okay to protest outside of officials' homes. In my opinion, especially like I agree with what Ninetales said from what I heard so far. Basically, the more power you have, the more responsible and open you have to be to the people that you serve, especially when we're talking about something like Roe v. Wade, which is like based on an individual's right to privacy. When you want to overturn something like that, then you also don't get privacy. I do not care. It's just a no-brainer to me. Officials have way too much power in this fucking country, and they need to feel uncomfortable because they're making everyone else, for the most part, feel uncomfortable. If you're gonna try to take away someone's privacy, like with Roe v. Wade, then hell, I want to know when these motherfuckers go to the grocery store. I want them to have fucking body cams. Obviously, I'm joking, but I want to know when they go to the grocery store. I want to know when they go for a walk. I want to know what they're talking about behind closed doors, in the halls of the Supreme Court and the halls of the Senate, everything. I want to know when these motherfuckers fuck, okay? Because apparently they want to know when I do it, and they want to know when my partner gets pregnant. So yeah, they forfeit their right to privacy when they came for my fucking privacy. So yeah, no privacy for them either.
Oh, coming in hot. Okay, with that, let's open it up then. So yeah, as I say every time, attack each other's ideas rather than each other if you can. But other than that, go ahead.
Do we not care about institutions, folks? Do we not care about the integrity of institutions? Do we literally just want these fucking places to be political establishments? Is that what you want? Is that
that's what the Supreme Court is? The Supreme Court is a political establishment. You can see by the people that they put on the Supreme Court. Otherwise, they wouldn't pick people that are ideologues that want to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's absolutely a political position. Anybody that says otherwise is fucking dreaming. Is dreaming.
Adorable, Jason.
You know what? My answer to that question,
you're adorable.
I do not give a fuck, okay?
All of you are adorable.
These people are trying to legislate what my partner, and by default me, because now I'm contemplating getting a fucking vasectomy right now, all right? So like, I do not give a fuck about these institutions because they clearly don't give a fuck about me or my fucking life. I don't give a fuck about it.
You don't give a fuck about America. That's great. That's fine.
Really
you don't care.
That's a really reductive conclusion. How reductive can you be?
Gang, this has gotten off the rails like almost immediately. So we're gonna go to the Lactoid. Had his hand up, so we're gonna let him go. and Nine Tails is it's hard to see. And then Professor Meat. So Lactoid, Nine Tails, Professor Meat, and then
Yeah, not so much of a question, just more of a point. I think the arguments being put forward by not Eli Monty, and then also a little bit by Jason, not nearly to the same extent, are I just heard a justification for January 6th. That's what I heard, right? Like,
Why?
I don't care. I don't care about the.
They're
I don't care. I don't.
short-sighted.
Hold on. I don't care about these institutions. It's political. They don't deserve privacy. They don't deserve,
No,
protection.
they don't deserve fucking privacy.
Sure. Again,
Wait, what does this have to do with overturning a democratic fucking election? What does this have to do with that?
It was shitty law. That's what it's got to do with.
Shitty law where in all 50 states because the states dictate their own laws. This is not comparable at all.
The reason people were justifiably upset with January 6th because it was a
It was
attack.
not justifiable. It was not justifiable.
No,
Justifiably upset.
It wasn't. Wanting to
Eli,
Why are we talking about January
Gang,
6th?
Justifiably
Calm down.
Order in half
Listen.
sentences.
upset.
calm down.
Jesus.
Let
Eli,
Lactoid just
justifiably
real quick.
upset.
Redheaded man,
Yeah,
please.
Not justified.
Redheaded man, please. Redheaded man, please. Let Lactoid finish, then Eli can respond. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, there was some confusion, so I'll just restate it.
think there
Why
was
a lot
some
of people were justifiably upset with January 6th, okay, is because it was a attack on a institution, right, of this country. We have the Congress is set up to do a particular task, and this is set out by the Constitution, and this is set out by common law. This is set out. This is what our process is, okay. And the reason people were upset is because a bunch of protesters, kind of got a little bit too far and began interfering with that institution. So every argument that you're putting forward could be used to justify January 6th, okay? What we're saying is that, no, these institutions shouldn't be able to be open to this kind of intimidation, this kind of...
Why?
Yeah. Why? Because we
Yes,
want
why?
them to make accurate decisions based on
And
the
they're not making accurate
Constitution.
decisions.
They're
No,
not.
really.
They're overturning a standing
okay, so
ruling that
hold on.
stood for
Okay.
over 50 years. What the fuck are you talking about?
Oh,
Let me
so
respond to Lactoid for a
decisis
second.
and
Let me respond to Lactoid for a second.
Monty.
Because that
Hold on.
was complete idiocy.
Let
me
Monty
respond-
go. Let Monty go,
Let
and
me
then we
do
have
this.
an order. Let Monty go, then we have Nine Tails, and then Professor Meat, and then Todd.
All right, Lactoid. Since, you know what? Let me. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna walk back on something. I'm gonna give you that. Technically, you're right. By my logic, you would be right. But I was specifically talking about within the confines of whatever the person above me with the snake flag, that dumb thing. That I was specifically talking about the confines of his own argument. Yes, but if he wants to say so, sure. I don't give a fuck about these institutions or what have you. But do you not see a difference between? Wait, hold on. Let me just ask you. What do you think? Do you think that January 6th
Yeah, that
was
guy in the
justified? Do
middle
you actually
is
think
definitely
Like,
fash.
Why are we talking about January 6th?
Because he brought it up. He brought it up.
I did bring it up, and I did bring it up, and I think this is the second time you misheard me. Justifiably upset means that I think people
what are
are
they justifiably upset about? What are they justifiably upset
January 6th, the attack.
They're upset about the destruction of an institution,
okay.
Monty.
You're talking about the government. I thought you were talking about protesters because you said this justifies. You said that I justified January 6th.
Other people's reaction.
No, I'm not.
Your
So
argument
I'm saying,
could
I'm
be
saying,
used to justify January
right.
6th.
I'm saying the reason why people are justifiably upset. The reason why I think people are right to be angry about January 6th is because it was an attack on our institution, Congress, right?
Okay,
and it seems like you don't have a problem with that.
Well, no, I don't have a problem with protesting outside of people's homes. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with protesting outside of the homes of legislators. And
You
people
went
in the
further.
Do
You went further. You went as far as to explicitly describe intimidation,
Their
right?
lives.
You want to know where they sleep, where they fuck, where they go to the grocery store.
Let Eli respond. Let Eli respond. Let Eli respond. And then
it was more of a joke. It was more of a those in particular were more of a jokes. But I know jokes are lost on conservatives, so that makes sense. You guys don't understand comedy, but you guys don't understand humor at all. But if they want to violate my privacy and want to know when I do shit like fuck my partner and when she gets pregnant, like I want to know when they do shit. Then I deserve to.
Is it a joke or not? Like, what part was joking?
Yeah, wait, you
Where were
said
you
it was a
joking,
joke. I
dog?
know you guys couldn't get it, but I'm just gonna repeat what I said.
I guess it's a little hyperbolic. But do you not see? Do you,
Little.
All right, so can
think-
we ask you
do you
to
think-
clarify the part that isn't hyperbolic? Is that fair?
Do you think that there is a how do I say this? So you think that we should not protest outside these people's homes?
Yeah, I think if the purpose is clearly intimidation, we shouldn't be doing that. Correct.
Okay. When someone is actively trying to control your life, you don't think you should use some sort of intimidation against that person to get them to stop?
No,
Well, no,
not
that
when they're
person-
a political
that-
institution.
That's true for all government bodies are trying to control our lives. That's why it's an inconsistent
Someone's trying
argument.
to literally
They're
control your life
literally
like this.
making women second-class citizens.
Roe
What the
v.
fuck
Wade.
are you guys talking
Like
about?
this.
Okay.
There's
Well, I
no
think it's
there's
different.
judge coming in trying to control you specifically. They
Okay,
did their job.
gang.
You disagree with what they did.
Gang, we have people in line. We gotta get through this.
Yeah.
This is great though. So we gotta go to Nine Tails, and then we got Professor Meat, then Todd, then Flowtrace, and if you want to talk, just raise your hand. So, and thank you for the follow. But continue. Nine Tails, please.
Yeah, Eli, seriously good to have you. Half baked takes. It's absolutely adorable how you like sucking the dick of Daddy's system. I personally think that if we were going to have a system, it would need to represent and serve the people, not the corporate interests of the ruling class. Therefore, an argument from that is an appeal
Professor
to authority
Meat has given
means
nothing
literally
but
nothing to
non-fucking
anybody who's willing
answers.
to
This guy
examine,
doesn't believe in
these
shit.
systems as
He's a
powers,
waste of fucking space on this panel.
functions of power that work against the people. Then, like, oh no, the system is under threat, is actually a good thing. Oh no, our elected/unelected officials are worried about us. That's a good thing, because therefore, we actually have power in this scenario. But if they're not afraid of us, if we take the system for granted,
Oh, it is a white
then,
nationalist flag.
then we're
Okay.
basically
We're dealing with a
fools who
little
are going to
fucking
take
prick.
whatever's given to us. I suggest that we take that we take the route of not settling for this recursion of getting back to this point where we're arguing whether or not a justice should be able to force a woman to carry a child. If we want to avoid getting to this point, then here's the solution: stop sucking off the system.
Real quick, what does corporate hegemony have to do with the pro-life, pro-choice debate?
You don't think that the ruling class can be considered both corporate hegemony and like actual state
The
power?
word
According to this discussion, no.
No, not at all. And also, the word "forced" is a very
we were
odd
only
term.
talking about Roe and only talking about Supreme Court justice. Very neat.
Okay, so
I'd like
yeah,
to-
this
it's
is
okay
actually
to suck off the system. If
there's
there are
a
any
whole
system sucker offs in the audience, I stand with you.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So we can make it about other things. I've got actually I'm going to try to run through this real quick. Seems like getting here with a nuanced opinion is going to be, because I do believe it's my turn now. Getting here with a nuanced opinion is going to be very difficult. So I'm just going to run down this list. Please try not to interrupt me, and I'll just basically let you guys. Seems like a lot of angry people on the panel who might want to come at me for things. I'll let you guys decide.
This guy's
So first off,
dumb.
So first off, fighting the state is pushback instead of like if we're equating like the destruction of property, threats of people as just pushback based on some kind of repression, then basically we're just leaving it up to people to just claim that they are incensed, and that is a justification. And in fact, in practicality, that's not how this functions in our society, and it cannot. Institutions are political. All right, some people that I generally agree with on the panel might get a little upset. The Supreme Court is, to some extent, ideally, it's less political than other ones, but it is functionally a political institution, whether we like it or not. It's inevitably going to be the case, and that is actually why the balance of power exists as it does. We can talk about whether or not that actually works. A justice is safe. Like a justice, we can just assume that because they're Supreme Court justice that they're safe. That's absolutely ridiculous. People in political positions are not necessarily safe. We cannot assume they're safe. Look at what happened with January 6th. I mean, that's an extreme example, but holy cow, if January 6th can happen, I think it's fair for someone to feel that their life is that their safety is in somewhat danger, just like any of us would if we had a mob of people as angry as are on the panel outside of our house. I don't care about their privacy. Because they have violated mine. This is a completely insane argument. They're not like directly violating your privacy. You're just disagreeing with what a government institution has done, which is why that argument could be used just as equally to justify January 6th. Violent protests also are like, if we're talking about like, it's funny, violent protests, unethical protests, destruction of property.
They're
these are
using a
actually
slippery
not the
slope
ways that
fallacy when they're
protests have been
referring to this guy
effective
on
in terms
January
of civil
6th.
rights
It's so
in our country's
fucking
history.
dumb.
Not at all.
It's
in
not
fact.
accurate.
In fact, that
It's
is like
not-
pretty much the
That's bullshit.
definition.
Bullshit.
No, that's pretty much.
100%
That's
bullshit, me.
okay.
That is
Cool. So you guys can say that. We'll get into
I'm
it.
glad
because
we're
we'll
interrupting
get into it
now,
because I'm almost
Nigel.
done. We're almost done. Literally, Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X is like the exemplification of how people of like the divide between effective protests versus ineffective protests in our country's history when it comes to civil rights. And lastly, I'll just say that like that I believe I'm going on a while, so I'm going to end. I had a couple more
This
points.
guy
but
should
I just want to
probably
say, like,
not ever
this
speak on King
concept that's
again,
already been
'cause he
brought up
sounds
of
like an
Martin Luther
idiot.
King about, like, I'm going to mess it up a little bit, but protests are the language of the unheard or something like that, or violent protests or riots, whatever the terminology was as it's been evoked here. This is true, but the thing is, it's like, in part, if you look at Martin Luther King's rhetoric overall, while this is a recognition that's coming from a place of empathy, it's also a sort of empathetic recognition of the ways in which those types of protests are actually ineffective. And so I'll pass it to you guys.
Professor Meat, there
I
are
told
two
you to
parts to that
tread lightly,
statement.
mate.
There are two parts to
When
that
have I ever
statement.
treaded lightly?
There
Okay,
are
so it is your
ri-
turn, Todd, but just real quick, it is your turn, Todd, so I'll let you finish, but then we got Flowtrace and Lactoid, and then then Eli.
Professor Meat, the first half of that sentence is riots are the voice of the unheard, but the back half of that statement is we don't fucking riot because it completely fucking destroys our movement.
Right.
The fact that it's been co-opted by dumb fucks who want to justify their rioting is absurd. And the fact that we want to act like the fucking Supreme Court, which is specifically not a political institution, it is a apolitical institution. It is meant to define and rule what is constitutional, should not be fucking political, and anybody that wants to make it that is doing it specifically out of their own fucking personal views upon the world. And it's
Would you
disgusting.
deny that they're elected by, they're appointed
They're
by...
not elected by anybody.
Would you
They
deny...
are appointed.
I misspoke. Would you deny that they are appointed by a political process?
They are appointed by a elected official.
By
That
a
does not
political
make
process.
them. That does not make them a political institution. A
Are they
political
appointed by a
institution would
political
require their
process?
election.
I can
Are
bridge
they
this gap real quick.
appointed
I can,
by a
because here's the-
political process?
They are
No.
appointed by a political process. They
Okay.
function within a political body. To a certain extent, they are appointed by a political process, even if it's indirectly, right? But the thing is, the separation of
very
powers.
directly.
The separation of powers exists to try to manage the fact that we can recognize that there will be political
Right.
incentives within the Supreme Court. They will be functioning to some extent as a political body, but we do want to minimize that, which is partially. It's not. I don't think it's the main point, but that's partially why we don't want to incentivize people to particularly politicize the Supreme Court more than is necessary.
I would not even...
Well, it's
go
already
as
been
far-
done.
I
It's already
wouldn't
been done
even
with the
go as
last
far
three
as to
Supreme
say-
Court justices.
I
that
think
were
what people
put
are
on
trying to say.
the court.
I think the court is absolutely political. I think the much more defendable position is that the court ought not be especially partisan. I think it is. I think we have to agree. It is fundamentally a political question. What is the Constitution? How ought we be ruled? But it is a part. But I think the idea is that we wouldn't want these discussions to become excessively partisan.
For once,
Well-
I agree with Flowtrace.
Half-baked takes. I think you're muted if you're trying to talk right now.
No, I just don't want to be loud and interrupt everybody. But how
Be
the
loud
fuck
and interrupt me.
Fair enough. But how is the Constitution political? They
Well,
are
because there are-
supposed.
Because there are different
the
ways in which we
Constitution political?
interpret the Constitution, right? So,
Does
like,
the
we have...
Constitution affect politics?
Oh, partisan. I should have used the word partisan, not
Yeah,
political.
if you want to say partisan, that's fine. But
It's not
even-
supposed to be a partisan body, correct?
it is...
I agree,
Well,
100%. That's why I think it is political, but I do agree it ought not be partisan. We have to try and restrain that as much as possible.
I don't know if you want
However-
to talk about an interpretation of a document and you want to talk about how different people are going to interpret words in a different way, you can get a very political stance out of just that process right there. That becomes very problematic. When we talk about the ideals of like judicial philosophy, right? Like judicial philosophy is supposed to be something that is very broad and understanding and very contextualized. But the problem is that philosophy is a political foundation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's highly political, but it is very foundational to in which how you determine what is going to shape your worldview, right? So when we talk about like, why do we have a quote unquote 5-4 Supreme Court differences, or how we have these very different interpretations, it is because in those differences of what is called judicial philosophy, there are those differences in which they kind of give out different rulings.
Okay.
I
So
don't think you can take away the idea of that not being political.
okay, so I'll let you respond very briefly,
True.
Todd, and then we gotta go. We gotta go to Lactoid, then Eli, then Ninetales.
These justices that are brought on are supposed to be textualists. They're supposed to be originalists. They're supposed to take the words upon that are written out in the Constitution and take them as fucking gospel. I'm sorry that you don't like that, but that is what our institution is designed
So do you think I'm
to
three fifths human? Do you think I'm three fifths human then? Because that was in the Constitution.
Hey, wasn't that reversed?
Okay, but like,
Shocking, Eli. Are you gonna bring up straw men the whole fucking night? Are you gonna bring an actual?
It's just your argument is a fucking stupid argument. Because again,
really?
If you're going by what's written in the Constitution, I mean, technically, based off of the leak draft, from what Alito said within the leak draft, well, it wasn't in the Constitution originally. So I mean, we could just go ahead and repeal it, right?
Do you know what enumerated rights are? Do you understand the process of enumerated versus unenumerated rights? Do you understand that?
Bro, I honestly, I don't.
Do you understand? Do you understand deep history?
Right into the constitutionality.
Okay.
I don't give a fuck about that point. I'm just saying that what you're saying right now about interpreting the Constitution, I think that's exactly the problem. Is the fact that the Constitution was originally written by old, racist, sexist white men.
Fucking bad.
To benefit that. What do you mean? What do you mean too fucking bad?
Fucking bad.
Too fucking bad.
Half-baked takes if you don't like it.
Document.
Half-baked takes if you don't like it when people point out that the system causes things like racist results and stuff like that, then you can't have it both ways. Saying too fucking bad. Yeah, but like the process doesn't always work. The process doesn't always work. The problem with your logic,
the process. Just saying that doesn't justify all forms of protest.
We have to have order in this court, gang. Lactoid, and then Eli, and then Ninetales.
Wait, can you give me in that list?
So
and then Flow Trader.
So I just want to talk a little bit about this, right? So Redheaded Man was right when he was talking about it comes down to a difference of judicial philosophy. Judicial philosophy doesn't always map on to what we consider to be partisan differences today, right? So there's obviously the conservative political movements in America are more likely to be in favor of originalist or textualist judges. They're not the same. They're two different. They're actually two different judicial philosophies, right? But they're more likely to be in favor of those kind of justices because, for their own political interests, right, that judicial philosophy seems to benefit them the most. Not always, right? Scalia was famous for this, right? Scalia made rulings that were antithetical to what Republicans wanted, and they got pissed off, right? Even Gorsuch right now, right? Gorsuch made several rulings. Gorsuch was the most famous for one regarding the whether or not you can discriminate against transgender people, right? And that was a Gorsuch opinion, again using an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. Judicial philosophy is a different animal, so I think that the judiciary should be as independent from partisanship as possible. It should be completely devoid of it, honestly. But that's not
going to recognize that it's impossible to make it completely.
But there's a difference between there's a difference between the justices themselves being partisan and partisan people picking justices because their independent judicial philosophy happens to get them what they want, right? Like originalism is like it's what I am like on a judicial basis. It's an incredibly reasonable way of interpreting law. And Alito's decision is like when you read it, it's actually an incredibly reasonable interpretation of the 14th Amendment, historical analysis, and the Constitution. He didn't do it because like he wants to own the libs, right? That's not what Alito's opinion was, and that's not what his intent was, and that's not what any justice's intent should be. And
this is actually not true. They've been working to overturn Roe v. Wade for fucking years. This is absolutely bullshit.
Of like your own personal political opinion. This is
100%
to what
fucking
the Supreme
bullshit.
Court is supposed to stand for, right? It is a complete reversal of the concept of that branch of government, and that's why it's so dangerous. That's why it's especially dangerous.
Thank you.
To try to intimidate the Supreme Court.
Okay, Eli, Ninetales, and I think it was Flow Trace into Todd. Yeah.
Meat. So you wanted to bring up Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X for whatever reason. So you do understand that, like, regardless, like, yeah, Dr. Martin Luther King did say that rioting is the voice of the unheard, and I 100% agree with that. Not only that, but even though Dr. Martin Luther King wasn't necessarily for riots, a lot of the protests back then did erupt into riots. So that whole point of like we shouldn't riot or what have you.
So no, this is
Well,
just
no,
because
no,
of
no,
how
no,
racist,
no,
sexist doesn't mean we should be.
Hey, one at a time.
need to be.
Respond and then continue, Eli. If you're
Yeah, I'll just say-
before you respond, Professor Meat, are you done, Eli?
Also, Lactoid. The whole thing about the
His name is Half Baked
the
Takes,
Supreme
and his
Court.
takes are
Can I-
half baked. He's a fucking idiot.
Fine, go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
And then you can roast
I'll
me.
just say,
Yeah.
I'll just say that like even in those examples, like, yeah, that happened a lot of the time, but I'm sure that like as far as I could tell, Martin Luther King viewed those things as like unfortunate. They view them as setbacks. They probably were setbacks to the movement, and he did his best to specifically advocate against actions.
How are those setbacks to the movement?
Because for all the reasons
Because
that Martin
white
Luther
people weren't made to feel comfortable about the fact that black people were oppressed.
Hold on. Let me answer. The whole goal of Martin Luther King's movement and other movements in history is an exemplification of the ways that human empathy is the most powerful tool to evoke to create change. And for those reasons, for all the reasons that he would particularly tried to do peaceful protests, to give people language, like put their hands on the back of their heads, and let the violence that other people treated them to so unjustifiably speak for itself. The reasons why he tried to advocate for that, all of those things are undermined and are destroyed from an optical perspective, which is the only perspective that matters when it comes to protests, obviously. All those are destroyed from an optical perspective.
Because so what you're basically telling me is that, and because this is how a lot of you people who bring up Dr. Martin Luther King work, you bring him up because of the fact that Dr. Martin Luther King, he's been whitewashed, he's been bastardized, and he makes white people, white men in particular in America, feel just a little bit more comfy, okay? With the way in which he's been whitewashed, right?
Please go read
I don't like him.
Go read Martin Luther King's doctrine. Just go read what he actually wrote, you dumb fuck. Shut the fuck
That's
up,
you don't even know.
Literally,
The quote that you guys are referring to was a warning that ultimately people would riot. So you guys are fucking wrong in your interpretation. Anyways,
Hold on.
Anyways,
let Monty continue.
I'm not done. But anyways, and this is the problem that I have with a lot of these talks and what have you, is that whenever we start to get a little bit edgy, whenever we start to get a little bit violent, there's always somebody, no offense, like me or like Lactoid or this person, whoever above me, that always wants to go, oh, you're being a little bit too mean. You're being a bit too destructive, while people's literal fucking rights are being fucking stripped away. How many people, how many women have to die from a back alley abortion before enough is enough and before we reinstate fucking abortion laws and codify Roe v. Wade?
When you started talking about abortion, that sounded one-to-one like a January 6th
We are
riot.
talking about abortion there, Bob.
You hang from fucking trees before cis white men get the fucking picture.
We aren't talking about abortion.
No, you know why? You know why he brought it up, so shut the fuck up.
Let him finish.
Can I just
fucking die before the message gets across? We're not gonna let that happen. So if we have to fucking riot,
Monty, are we talking about abortion?
If we have to stand outside of Supreme Court Justice's house, guess what? I'm gonna be right front and center, motherfucker. Consider me fucking
Are we
there.
talking about abortion or are we talking about Roe? Are we talking about Roe or are we talking about abortion?
I realize you really
We're
need to make
talking
things
about
stupid in order to have a
Roe.
point.
Stupid?
but-
I like to get down in the nitty gritty. Nine Tails, shut the fuck up.
Okay, enough.
I thought you were
Enough.
saying that you didn't want to talk over people and be really loud, half-baked takes.
We have to go in order. We have an order here. I believe it was Nine Tails, then Flowtrace, then Todd, then Professor Meat, and then Jason's Society, please. Yes. And Redheaded Man. Yeah.
So it would be amazing if the system were perfect and we could actually address issues within the system. But guess what, Special Snowflakes? It doesn't actually work like that. The more divergent you are as a person or a group from the ruling class, the less accessible many things about the state are to change because you're not represented. So as much as we like to think, oh yeah, just vote, just protest with pickets and don't do anything mean because respectability politics, the more we're literally neutering the ability for the working and lower classes to stand up to the state. I'm not done. I need to get my next point. Rioting isn't just violence. Rioting is a point on a spectrum along the bunch of things that we can do under the umbrella of direct action and then the further umbrella of protest. when everyone who's talked about rioting here
He's
and is
sporting
against
a
it talked about it like
white
it's just
nationalist
something
flag,
that
it looks
people
like.
do
That's what
without
somebody was
talking
saying
about
earlier.
how or why we get there. But guess what? We got here, A, because people are literally that fucking pissed off, and B, because the state gives them no other way to be able to use their voices as a force of anger. So actually rioting, I think, is a natural force within social systems. And when the system can't handle that rioting, it's a sign that your state is literally afraid of dissent.
Like January 6th? Why couldn't all of
Can
these
we have a
arguments be applied to
response?
January 6th?
Every single one can.
I know,
Every
like you're
single one of
Fucking
those
me,
arguments
they
apply.
could, dog.
Yeah.
Don't worry, they could.
I know you
Yeah.
wanted to,
Minute.
but that's what I find
Then why
hilarious
couldn't
is
they?
that
Can you
like
explain to me?
Nine
Oh,
tails.
it's not
They-
like that.
they
Can you just
could, but
explain why not?
they
Can you
could,
just
but that-
Man,
explain why
one
not?
mom, you're fucking nailing
you
it.
should
they
ask it
wouldn't
more.
apply
You
to
should
January
keep asking it so I can't actually answer me. That's fucking fantastic.
Sorry, I was trying to interrupt everyone else who was yelling over you, not you. I understand that you're
fair enough.
you're really upset about it, but please go ahead.
So with January 6th, they weren't opposing the ruling class. If anything, they were as conservatives fighting on the side of the GOP, they were definitely fighting for the ruling class. So if you actually want to talk real power dynamics between the
Exactly.
proletariat and the ruling class, instead of just like,
January 6th wasn't just a riot, it was
democracy, people
insurrection, very
vote,
different and far
electoralism,
more
which I'm
dangerous.
actually
Yep.
for democracies and secure elections. But this isn't how you get it. So if you want to try to keep on referring back to January 6th, a defunct movement that wasn't even valid, that's on you. That's your inability to analyze these situations.
You can't say that they were advocating for the ruling class if they
I
didn't
can
get
answer
the
that.
way.
Okay,
I can
class.
answer that question. I can
They were
answer that.
specifically in opposition to the ruling class. They were trying to like topple the government.
Everyone
Oh,
wants
big
to.
time
Everyone wants
groiper.
to have a say.
I agree with you. That's why it's a shitty
Big
example.
time fucking
Real quick,
groiper.
It's one-to-one.
That's what I
get
get
as
from
many
him, too.
people as possible
That's
in
total
because
vibe.
a lot of you want to talk. That's a great thing, but we have to kind of go in as a certain order. I know Jason Society hasn't said much at all, so we're going to let him go. Then we're going to let Flow Trace, Todd, Eli, Redheaded Man, Professor Me. Go ahead.
So, okay, a couple things. The riots quote with MLK was actually a warning saying, listen, we're trying to be peaceful and keep things peaceful, but if you continue and you don't recognize us, Riot is the voice of the unheard. It will ultimately get to that if you don't hear us, okay? So that's number one. Number two, I never said anything, and I don't think many of us, maybe Monty had mentioned something, but I don't think any of us said that we should riot outside these Supreme Court justices' houses. We said we should protest outside these Supreme Court justices' houses, and that is distinctly different. I'm not talking about throwing bricks through windows and setting fires and shit. I'm talking about peaceful protests. They've done it before, and it was done during the civil rights movements with legislators as well. So this is not anything new. This is nothing new to happen for people to go protest outside these people's homes. Do I think that they should be protected, these Supreme Court justices? Yes. Do I understand they have a responsibility to make decisions based on their view of the Constitution? Yes. Do I think that they were put there because of their views towards the Constitution and other social issues that would benefit the Republican Party and people who are anti-Roe v. Wade? Yes, absolutely. Should people fight fervently for their rights, for their civil rights, as a result of the potential for Roe being overturned? You're damn right they should. And I think that protest is one tool in the tool belt. We should also be petitioning our legislators in our local and state legislatures where we can still make change, because you have a right to do that. That's what fucking the overturning of Roe does. So go start petitioning your local and state legislators to fucking codify protection of women's rights, and do that across the board all the way up to the federal level. But protests cannot be taken out of the tool belt. It's a very, very important part of the piece. It's a very important part of the puzzle. So yeah, you have to do all these things. It's not one thing. It's a bunch of action to make that change that you want to make, right? You can't just fucking say, okay, I'm going to go picket outside somebody's house and that's going to be the end of it. That's one arm to this whole thing. And I think that's what people are missing. And that's what always been my context of this is, yes, that's an important tool in the tool belt and we should use it.
Okay, thank you. Flow Trace, Todd, and then we'll go from there. Please.
Yeah, I think the needle that we could thread to try and build a bridge here is that we need to be able to recognize why people riot, because there are reasons why that happens, and still condemn the riot. I think that we need to be, because you're absolutely right, riots are the language of the unheard, and I think that is why it is actually really good to look at January 6th, because I think that these arguments do apply to January 6th, but I don't think that necessarily disproves those arguments. I think it is absolutely the case that if you look at the people who rioted in January 6th, and if you talk to like conservatives or like people in middle America, they do feel absolutely unheard and ignored by the coastal elite, by like the woke social mob. You know, these people absolutely do feel like they're being excluded and not being recognized, and it's important to recognize that and seek to resolve it. But equally, we need to be able to say, okay, you rioted at January 6th, like, I'm sorry, but like, this is unacceptable, this is going too far. And I think that the point that Monty just made, or excuse me, not Monty, Ninetales just made about how this is then a reason why we should address these problems is another good one. Rioting typically only happens when there is a really extreme situation or problem, and that is a good reason for us to try and solve those issues so rioting doesn't happen in the first place. But like, part of that is being able to say like, hey, these riotings are bad. Like, if we can't even recognize that rioting is something that is understandable that is happening but still bad, then it's going to be really hard to tackle it. And I think that's something we have to be doing.
Because we do want movements. We do want movements to be able to. No, I'm saying say it's bad because we do want movements to be able to talk about which actions they do and don't want to do. They can't just accept rioting. However, we can't also just say that the groups that rioters riot on behalf of are necessarily fully accountable for that if they didn't directly call for rioting. Nor can we say that just because some rioting bad, that means all rioting is therefore no rioting. And again, like, I'm not talking
absolutely
about rioting
correct, Wine Mom.
violence. I mean all direct action that puts pressure.
I'm sorry, I
on
didn't know you had a
state
falling out with
Wick. So
okay, well,
I'm broadening this tent. I'm broadening this tent because direct action doesn't start and finish with rioting.
Okay, well, I guess it sounds like we're maybe having a difference in opinion of what we consider to be rioting, but basically, when I'm saying rioting,
no, I think we have the same opinion. I think we have the same opinion, but I think the argument changes when we think of this as a tent of actions that make up direct action.
Well, then I would say generally rioting is bad, but I think, unfortunately, I think this is where the conversation has to go, and it's really difficult, is that I think there probably are justified cases of rioting. The problem is we don't live in those societies. Because you're right, a big difference with January 6th is the fact that these people are wrong. If it was actually the case, and please understand, it is not the case, but if it actually was the case that there was some cabal of like Democratic politicians who were rigging the election and they had rigged the courts, then like at that point, the kind of direct action that January 6th done might actually be justified. Like a more extreme example, right? If you're living in Nazi Germany, then like, okay, there's maybe some like rules of normal politics that aren't true. But the problem is we disagree about what is descriptively happening, which is why these conversations are really difficult. There are some people on the left that really do feel like the repeal of Roe v. Wade is like this hugely horrific authoritarian thing. There's some people on the right that think that like Joe Biden and the Chinese government have like taken over and are running things. And the problem is justification of rioting is dependent upon the descriptive reality. I don't think you can categorically say that rioting universally is wrong or universally is good. It really depends. And that is where this conversation becomes really difficult because we no longer agree in this country about what is actually happening.
Okay, so Todd, Lactoid, Redhead Man, Eli, go ahead.
I'm just curious, where is this separation between the legislature and the Supreme Court or these justices occur for you? If it is such a political institution, then what is the difference between them? Anybody, Monty, Ninetales, anybody on this side, please explain to me what the point of the Supreme Court is if they just work as a political institution.
I think that the Supreme Court is a political institution, but I think that we can distinguish between different levels of, oh God, what was the better word we were using? Just different levels of partisanship. Yeah, I think we can distinguish between different levels of partisanship within political questions. Because, like, I do think, like
it is a dumb
the idea that all men are created equal, that we ought to have freedom of speech, these are political questions, but I think it's just a given in this country that we, I do think it, legitimately, I think that it is both a political and a moral question, but I don't think you can separate these. Like, I think ultimately the idea that like our government, what our government ought be doing is partly a political question. I think the idea is that the Supreme Court should theoretically be above like what we would describe as like petty squabbles that aren't important. The Supreme Court should only be talking about things that are really important and fundamental political questions, which ideally would be handled in not like a really like I don't know the right adjective, but in a bad way, in a way that's like really shitty.
Flo, you would agree that those petty squabbles are the partisanship, right?
Yeah.
Those are the petty squabbles.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So so removing the petty squabbles and removing the partisanship is the goal of that institution.
Yeah,
and the moment we start giving life into the idea that we can fucking make it partisan, which is what they're doing by protesting, is the problem.
Oh.
Correct?
No, it was made partisan by the people who put those justices on the Supreme Court.
I think you could thread a needle here.
Well, hold on. Why do you say that?
You could thread a needle here and say that protesting. I think you could thread a needle here and say that protesting a ruling that you disagree with is more than just trying to put pressure on the Supreme Court. I think there's a real argument to be made that expressing that you dislike this ruling and there being a large expression of that doesn't necessarily need to be an act that is like seeking to compromise the integrity of the Supreme Court.
Okay. So, we're gonna go to. We gotta be brief, gang. So try. Lactoid, Redhead Man, Eli, and then Ninetales. So.
Oh, brief. Okay. I'll just.
No, I mean, you haven't gone in a while, right? But like the back and forth and stuff, it's good.
Interchange.
I just want to. Yeah.
Okay. So, protesting should be to influence the legislature, not for asserting partisan influence on a nonpartisan body, such as the Supreme Court, one guided by judicial philosophy. You know, I think it's interesting. You know, we had an entire summer in 2020 where we saw massive riots, and you know the lefties used all these same talking points, right? Why do riots happen? Riots are the language of the unheard. Riots are a legitimate way to affect change. Quotes from MLK. This happened constantly, right? And then January 6th happened, and then all those opinions and all those statements went out the window. We didn't hear about them for a year. Now we're right back to where we were.
Those were not riots. That was a fucking insurrection, you dick.
And
you are purposely
fucking from the rhetoric and positions.
Remembering the history of fucking what happened on January 6th.
The population as a whole.
Oh, this guy.
That a lot of people like. This
anything
is just
from saying it was an insurrection.
Right? They don't
anything
care
to
about
avoid
the
saying
institutions
that.
and process. They are aiming for a certain policy outcome, and they are willing to use intimidation and violence.
No, I know.
Well, first off, just to touch on you a little bit. I think you and I would definitely agree that there is a large difference in between the operators in between January 6th and then the majority of which being protests during George Floyd's murder are going to be less centralized, less organized, and some may erupt into a riot, correct? The numbers may be bigger as far as like what the damage is going to be, right? As far as like some of the riots or some of the protests that turned into riots, granted, again, not a large portion of the protests, but a large media shown proportion, are going to be vastly different than the organization to overthrow an election. We would have to say that there is a difference there, right?
So I think you're underplaying what happened.
Okay.
When you storm a police precinct and burn it down, when you declare an autonomous zone outside of the jurisdiction of the United States, which, I mean, not to the same extent, obviously, but it's sort of in line with what the Confederates did, right? Like, this is us now, right? Yeah, I think that's kind of a big deal. I think that's something that, like, should be considered to be a big deal. And I think that, and like you said, the numbers, right? This was the most expensive riots in American history, right? $2 billion worth of insurance claims, and we know about 40% of the people of the businesses that were destroyed
aren't going to get that back. Yeah,
and they weren't even insured, right?
Yeah,
and so you can imagine like the amount of devastation that people underwent during that entire process. And what was the justification we heard? This is simply like rioting is the language of the unheard. This is what was being said, and then January 6th hits, right?
The justification is the fact
and then all of a sudden it's out the window.
Police continue to brutalize black and brown people and disproportionately police their communities, and they've been doing this after countless riots throughout the Civil Rights Act, and it's still fucking going on. There's your justification right there. I'm glad that you don't see that.
In our country,
your interpretation of that justifies rioting.
Hold on. What did Pennzoil do to what did Pennzoil do to black and brown people in America?
Yeah.
What did Walmart do? Like, you are just.
What did the mom and pop bakery?
We're not pissed at that too. We're not pissed at that too. But you know what we do see?
Walmart is horribly exploitative. What the fuck are you talking about?
We saw a fucking cop put his knee on the neck of a black man for 9 whole ass minutes.
And
Go
went to
into
prison.
your hands
And
like,
we
"Oh, what,
fucking
motherfucker.
We
Shake your
punished
hands
him.
at me."
Monty, did we punish him? For lying. Did we punish
So, I
Chauvin?
think you have to.
Thank
admit
God that's a
there's
typical case.
What?
Thank God that's how it
Jesus
normally
fucking
happens.
Christ. Did he walk? Did he just walk away and like, oh, I killed that black dude?
Does that mean that no cops? Hey,
How many
Half-Face, does that
times
mean
did
that
that
no
happen
cops ever get to
prior?
walk?
Jesus
No,
fucking
hold on,
Christ!
hold on.
Stop
So,
living in this false sense of reality, you.
Yeah, says the person who's
hey,
like,
hey,
because
hey,
Derek
hey.
Chauvin was charged, all cops never get off.
Okay, hold on.
Eli,
I
I'll
bet
let you
homie's never been
respond.
stopped
I know
by
you
a
were
cop
interrupted
once.
there. Just real quick, I know Eli, you were interrupted there, so if you want to finish your response, otherwise Lactoid still hasn't finished his thing. So.
I mean, I'm just tired of like the disingenuousness from like Lactoid and the other conservative person on this panel, acting as though there isn't a difference, or as though there wasn't some sort of justification. Like that's just out the fucking window. Like, oh, what was the justification for all of these insurance claims and all this rioting? Fucking death, motherfucker. That was the justification. Okay, senseless and
no way.
unnecessary fucking death. Yeah, rioting is a voice of the unheard because, again, even though the Civil Rights Act has been passed, even though we've been peaceful all of these fucking years, and going to the road thing, women, been peaceful, putting up with men's shit for all of these fucking years, and then all of a sudden, there people like you pop up and go, well, I can't understand why you would burn down a police precinct. I can't understand why you would riot and why you would, throw a tantrum. I mean, talk to the fucking families that have lost family members because of police brutality. Talk to the fucking children who have lost their mothers because of back alley fucking abortions. Talk to other fucking people that are not within your little fucking bubble for once in your fucking life. Half-baked takes. Get your ass back here.
Eli Monty, I think if you talk to people outside of your bubble, and
Dude,
even a lot of hold on, let me finish. You went for a while. I waited patiently. I know you're mad. I know you're really mad, but I let you go on for a while.
I am really mad.
And I understand you're really upset, so I let you go on for a while. But please let me respond a little bit now, all right? I understand that you're incensed, but the thing is that a lot of the time, and this goes for like on individual interactions with people too. You can see this if you're just talking to a group of people. You can be really mad about something, right? And it can be understandable for you to be angry. But when you're angry and you're shaking your fists and screaming, and the person to your right is going, hold on, guys, there's actually a reasonable take here. I'm going to explain calmly what's wrong with this. People are going to look at the person shaking their fists and screaming and angry, and they're going to disregard them. They're going to say, man, whatever that guy has to say, he's insane. I'm going to be way more likely to...
They're going to have some empathy maybe if they don't have their head up their ass, and they might go, maybe there's some validity to this person's emotion.
But some of them might, but what we're talking about is whether or not certain types of protests hurt their cause more than others, right? Or hurt their cause where they didn't need to. So I guess what I would ask is, do you think that there is do you think that it is possible that, like, I guess just let me ask you, why do you think, since we're all talking about Martin Luther King so much, why do you think that Martin Luther King advocated so strongly for his protests to not be violent, to not be threatening, to not be destructive? Why do you think that was?
To appeal to white people with their heads up.
Okay. No, hold on. Okay, so all right.
He also said, "Beware of the white moderate." So
let me address that. The problem is when you're phrasing like to appeal to white people with their heads up their asses. Let me rephrase this in a way that's more accurate to reality. What he did is he didn't want to turn white people against his cause, because white people, in this case, the establishment people, are literally the people you're trying to reach when it comes to protest. Otherwise,
it's funny how easy it is for white people to turn against your cause.
You should turn them to your cause instead of being violent.
It's almost as if they, by default, don't want to be for your cause.
Exactly.
No. So hold on.
Maybe they don't want to be against your cause.
Y'all might want to work towards getting the middle.
Okay. So, Eli, if you have anything to say, then we got to move on. And
I'm gonna go ahead and take my. I just wanted to say something about the January 6th thing real quick, if I may. I just wanted to say there is a difference between the protests that are going on right now and the Black Lives Matter protests and what fucking happened at January 6th, okay? What had happened was a bunch of people, predominantly, dare I say, white people, were pissed because their white supremacist leader, Donald fucking Trump, did not win the fucking election. That's what happened. And so they threw a fucking fit because they didn't have their way. They couldn't contemplate the fact that America did not want that tub of lard in office anymore. So they went, they stormed the Capitol over fucking nothing. They stormed the Capitol over fabricated little over fabricated. I don't know why you're being a fucking child half-baked takes, but whatever. Maybe you need to take a hit from a bong and get fully baked to be an actual adult.
The way you're acting is a microcosm of the problem with these types
You are the shit that I fucking laugh at, and that
people outside your bubble are gonna look at you and think, wow, that guy's so fucking out of control.
I'm almost done. The thing is, these people were crying and they were bitching over the fact that they just didn't get their fucking way. That's all it was. Nothing that they felt at January 6th was justified, reasonable, none of that shit. It was all fabricated, it rode on the backs of white fucking supremacy, and that was it. It was not valid. It was not something that needs to be like, oh, well, this is the same thing that happened. What you're doing justifies January 6th. No, it fucking doesn't. There's a level of nuance that we need to engage here. Let's actually have spines here and call it what it was. It was bullshit. It was a terror attack. It was a terrorist attack. That's all it fucking was. Okay.
Okay, we all agree. Most of us agree with that. Most of us agree that the January
because it does not. What you're saying is that what my Reddit or someone else's or what's going on right now with the anti-Roe with the pro-Roe shit justifies or would put some sort of justification or spin on January 6th. And
we're not saying that you're saying that. What we're saying is the arguments that you provide to justify your positions are inconsistent with your overall position because you don't think the January 6th.
So you're just not listening.
That's slippery slope bullshit. I'm sorry. That's
a
slippery slope fallacy.
How is he not listening?
I heard you guys saying that earlier. That's a slippery slope fallacy.
Let us respect the institution.
It's just an inconsistency in the argument. You can say that I'm not listening, but I'm not just going to take your word for it. If you'll forgive me.
Care about if you think I have an inconsistency.
Fundamental argument relies on
a panel. You probably should.
We got a
fundamental argument. Okay, can I respond to me once for one thing?
You can respond.
My argument is
just really quick.
Because it's going to end up being an entire layered argument.
It's a very quick response, I promise.
To enjoy.
Please let me deal with it. Redhead, let me deal with it.
It is a quick response.
It's your turn is coming up, and you can come in then. We got to move on. Lactoid, Redhead Man, Ninetales.
No, I was supposed to go right after Eloy. Actually, I was supposed to go after Jason, but go ahead, Lactoid. It's fine.
So, okay. Professor Meat, I actually really am concerned about one of the things that you're doing that a lot of people in this panel are doing. And this is why I don't like to cite MLK. And if I do, I'm usually doing so ironically. When you talk about, you are putting it, I think it's telling that the only way you can convince the more riotoriously inclined people to try to not do that is by, again, appealing to the partisan outcomes, right? How are you going to look when you do this?
Well, what's the point of a protest? It's about bringing attention to something. It's about the optics, about how people perceive.
I understand that, but what my concern is, we are against violence against innocent people, as a principle, right? If my neighbor to my right, killed, or let's say my neighbor to my right burned down my fence, and then I went over and burned down my neighbor to my left's house because I was just fucking angry, right? So I just burned down. If I was neighbor to the left, I'd be like, what the fuck, right? I didn't touch your fence. I didn't do anything to you. Why are you destroying my shit? Why are you attacking me, right? And riots, at least the ones that we saw, and that a lot of the justifications have been coming from, are attacks on innocent people, right? That's what's wrong with it. I don't care if it looks bad that you're attacking an innocent person. I think it's bad when you attack an innocent person intrinsically. And I think that's when you threaten institution, when you threaten the foundational institutions like the Supreme Court, by intimidation, that's bad intrinsically, not because it might look bad. Okay.
I think they're both valid criticisms because I guess what I would say, I think everything you said is true, except for the part when you say it's not because it looks bad. If what you care about is how it looks to other people, which to some extent, obviously, you do when you should when you're protesting something. That's just an example of how. It's just an example of the inconsistency in the.
See, but this goes to show how the conversation has gotten deliberately derailed because you guys went straight to riots when we were talking about protesting outside of somebody's house. You guys wanted to immediately move to riots. Nobody said riot at the beginning. You guys want to frame the conversation that way deliberately so that you can make it a worse situation.
To be clear, people did literally talk about riots at the beginning. Of course, the conversation about protesting is going to go to rioting. That's totally reasonable.
Also, January 6th got brought up as an example because
we have to let Redhead go.
Did literally
Redhead needs his turn. Redhead's turn is next. So please, Redhead, then Ninetales, then Flowtrace, I believe. So
I'm gonna do my best to bridge a gap that's not very easy for me to bridge. Just inherently, and you'll notice what I'm doing. So I'm one of the very few minorities in my state, politically. Nebraska is a very wide variety state, although we're concentrated in different areas and we have a different form of like how we split our electoral college votes. And we're one of 2 states to get to do it. Maine's the other one. And we've had the fortune of actually living in my home district, CD2, to split and send our electoral college vote over to a Democrat in a heavily Republican state. The reason why I bring this part up is because it makes me feel, and somewhat, not fully, I can never understand it fully, I can only comprehend it, understand the idea of what it's like to not have your goals politically be reflective upon and sent out to, let's say your state, right? So we've got an incredibly pro-life governor. Was just on CNN the other day talking about how in cases of rape and incest, those are children too. So we're going to ban Roe v. Wade, or we're going to institute a full-on ban, not allowing for cases of rape and incest. The joy that we have here is within our political organizing, we have to reach what we would call standardly, if we're going to like admit to the grand narrative of like what our state is, the white moderate, to sit there and say that these things are going to affect people even though they may not be directly affected themselves. So you have to appeal to a voter that says, this may not affect you, but that's okay. I need you to understand how drastically it's going to affect this other person. That problem of bridging the gap requires a good sense of public appearance, right? Of what we're talking about, of why we are anti-rioting and pro-protest. Becomes vastly problematic because you can't upset the white moderate as in a way of enacting your policy. What gets so upsetting for me is the saddest part that I feel for Eli, Ninetales, and Jason in some of a sense is how defeated you believe you actually are when just on this one subject, if we could keep the conversation to Roe v. Wade, it's a vastly unpopular move. So you have a great chance to be politically effective, which is realistically the only way that you get laws passed. I can't speak directly again to the level of persecution that you're going to experience as a white male. I just fucking can't. But I can understand as best as possible the frustration. But you can't resort to a tactic in which it's going to undermine your effectiveness.
Okay, so let's finish up the line. Ninetales, Flowtrace, and Eli. Then I have another question for all of you.
I just want to interject real quick. I just wanted to say I don't feel defeated. I don't feel defeated at all. I'm actually trying to galvanize, and some people want to say radicalize, not necessarily to do violence, but I do want more people. I do want to inspire more people. I do want more people to stand up. The conversation just for some reason got on the topic of rioting, and Meat quoted Dr. Martin Luther King not knowing what he was doing. So, but
the reason it got on rioting is because A, other people literally brought up riots and violence.
But I wasn't here for opening.
Two, my fault. Okay, just blame me for the rioting.
Well, there's another reason. I'm not just blaming you. The other reason is that January 6th as an example of something that I think we would generally agree reached the level of something that we might call riots.
That
January
wasn't a
6th got
riot.
brought up
It's
as-
an insurrection.
January
It's
6th,
two
like-
different things.
Please let me
Jesus
finish. January
Christ.
6th
Holy
got brought up as an example of why your positions are inconsistent because you don't think that the same justifications apply to
Thinking
January
they're
6th.
the same is inconsistent.
I don't
So
think
I'm
they're
going
the
to
same. I
take my
think they're
turn
different.
now.
I think they're different.
I'm going to take my turn now.
But your
I'm-
people for thinking they're different are not
Ninetales,
consistent.
Flow Trace,
I-
Eli, then I
I-
have a question,
Mine
and then
are.
we can go in.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask that I don't get interrupted for this because I have written most of these down, so I'm not interrupting people, let alone the power struggle. So, like, if you want to dogpile me afterwards, though, feel free, because I'm certainly not against that. So, the amount of movement defeating privilege on display here is beautifully self-reporting. If movements bow to these people's ideas of nonviolence, there wouldn't be full rights for anybody but hetero-cis white men. Describing this as a fight to establish legislation is out of touch. It's a fight for equality and human rights on its most valid basis, so it's really convenient here that the chuds keep misrepresenting that. Rioting gives people with relative privilege the ability to project their selfish judgment. And what I mean by that is that we have a whole bunch of people here who aren't evaluating rioting with anything to do with the perspectives of the people who feel the need to riot. It's simply, what do I think about this and why it should matter? The amount, is that still? Yeah, the amount of people who feel the need to minimize the voices of people to fight for their rights here is really telling. Being against partisan actions isn't just signaling BLM versus January 6th. It should also mean being against violence of a state. If you care more about optics than the issues they're actually fighting against, it says a lot about how hard they have to fight to even get the issues talked about. All the condemnations of BLM involve assuming the violence against them was much smaller than the violence they're putting out, which it definitely wasn't. And finally, red herrings which rely on assuming January 6th is the same as BLM is a trick for people who can't come up with consistent standards for when it is wrong. Meat's appeal to optics is a great example of how movements which don't inherently appeal to ruling class interests are up against opinions defaulted against them.
Okay.
And that's it, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Responses, and then we got to go to Flow Trace.
Yeah, I'll just say
I
the
also don't
argument,
care about optics,
the
so.
arguments presented imply that a consistency, but all of the arguments can be equally applied to both. So I would actually
Not
say,
mine.
I think that as far as I can tell, the implications of the arguments compare them. I know I
Okay,
understand
so-
that you don't think they're the same, but just to be clear, my point is not that they are the same. My point specifically is that they are not.
You seem really confident about this, but like, why don't you think why do you think that they apply? Because I can state very clearly that one is fighting for equality and human rights under a system which historically has acted as a ruling class against them. And the other, January 6th, is a bunch of people who didn't like the results of an election.
So
that
there
is
is a
simply not
difference.
comparable.
Yeah, so you have described aptly a difference between the things, but neither
And
of those were presented as the justification for riots, right? The actual justifications for riots that you might present, such as an example of
Because riots
oh,
are
well,
the problem is that riots are inherently justifiable. The problem is that nobody, when they're talking about how awful riots are talking about how we get to the point where people are rioting in the streets, rather than rioting at the actual source
Because
of the
people
problem.
refuse to actually address.
No,
the
it's because
matter.
the state pushes them.
Hold on.
It's,
no,
no,
yes.
it's,
No, I'm going
it's
right
because
there.
it's
I'm going right there.
You're dogpiling me. You're dogpiling me. I'm pushing back. Okay, no, it's let me respond.
Oh,
It's because
fucking way. Shut the fuck up.
reason why
It's because the
Stop
state.
immediately, gang.
The
Stop.
power of the state
Stop.
is
Go
inherently
ahead.
given
Stop, or you will be
and
stopped.
blessed upon
Stop, or you will
by
be
the
stopped.
people.
Okay,
That's
well,
your
here we go.
problem. Is that you're not.
Okay. Ninetales. Go. And then we have
Yeah.
to move on.
These people that like the ruling class
Tasty
uses
left.
private
Cool. Thank you very
property
much
to
for the
like
follow.
maintain the
Happy to
hegemony
have
of their
you.
interests, and that's why these protesting groups are always pushed away from private properties to move them away from points of pressure that would actually be effective.
Okay. Flow Trace, Todd, Eli. Go.
I think that first I'd like to address the interesting point that Lactoid brings up in regards to optics, because I think Lactoid is right insofar as there is this real concern where if you have the perspective that, we do have this categorical opposition to the kinds of rioting that occurred, then it is kind of weird to go after the optics, right? It's not to say that this is anywhere near moral equivalence, but I remember back in the day, there were a lot of people who'd be like, oh, I don't like Nick Fuentes. Why? Oh, he's so bad optically. It's like, wait, that's your first problem with Nick Fuentes? Like, that kind of speaks to something. But I think that it's the case, Lactoid, that what I would say is I think that we need to distinguish between condemning the acts of individual rioters that are committing these violences versus like the phenomena of riots as a whole that can lead to these kinds of things. I think you can get a really good analogy to warfare, which is going to give me some rope. So in warfare, even the most surgical kind of warfare and the most morally justified form of warfare is still going to carry with it some amount of collateral damage that you can't get rid of.
They're never getting rid of guns. Are you crazy?
Hey, those individual instances, we should call those out, but we should not say that we're now going to condemn the phenomena of warfare itself. In the same way that, if you are having a protest or a riot, you should be condemning individual instances of people committing unjustified violence, but I don't think that we should be condemning the thing as a whole, because I do think when you get to excessively bad conditions that you can justify forms of these riots. Like, I think, for example, again, I want to be really clear here because it's going to sound like I'm trying to justify current riots, and this is the problem, is that I don't think that the material conditions that we are in justify these kinds of riots. But if hypothetically we did live in a world that was literally like Nazi Germany or something like that, then I do think that you could make an argument that, like, hey, even though your rioting is going to be hurting people that aren't part of this, this is something you have to do. And I think that's the needle that we have to thread, and why this is really hard, because I think rioting is, the justification of rioting is dependent upon what is the riot about, and are they right or wrong.
Okay, so Todd, Eli, then I have another question, and we can go, please.
Well, I'm just confused on what becomes justifiable to riot for, because Ninetales literally said that all riots are justifiable. So
no, I
you just playing the fucking
no, I
game?
didn't. You're so bad at handling arguments you don't like.
Are you kidding me?
You're really bad at handling.
You fucking did.
You're really bad at handling arguments you don't like.
The fucking voice of the unheard. What are you fucking talking about?
I also said there are plenty of instances where they're not valid. The whole point was that when we consider when these are valid, we have to consider other things, like the amount of force and violence that they're facing from the state, how long this has been going on, and how reasonable it actually is to expect them to get through with democratic means. The whole, I listened to a lot of BLM protesters through live streams and channels that spent the whole nights there and interviewed people. They weren't saying fuck the government. They weren't saying police bad. They were saying we've been trying to fight this for decades within the system, and and this is our outcome, is still getting killed in the streets by police. We can't keep fighting within the system and expecting this to change, because doing the exact same thing and expecting different results is idiocracy.
Wick, real quick, I was mentioned. Is there time for me to respond? I know you wanted to move to the next question.
Yeah, that's fine, but we'll see if Todd's done first.
I could.
Todd, are you done? Okay, then Eli, and then you can respond really quick, and then I do have another question. Professor, we'll get to the other question. You can maybe put your response in
in a lot of those arguments. I would just like to point out the reason I focus on optics.
Is your name Eli, Professor Me?
You did just address me.
It's Eli's turn.
Oh, shit.
My name is Professor Me.
Mom, you're fucking savage, yo.
But go ahead, Eli.
So I just wanted to say, to the point of violence, I did these whole optical arguments about optics of oh, you got to be concerned with the way in which your movement looks. Honestly, that's kind of lost on me, and I don't really give a fuck as much, because the thing is that throughout history, there has rarely ever been a time where you've had a struggling oppressed class versus an oppressive ruling class. I understand, right? I guess I'm going to extend an olive branch here just a little bit and try to build a bridge here.
Ace.
One of the first times in which you'll ever hear me say that, okay?
Hey, there we go.
I don't care. But I can understand the argument of optics. I just don't really think, with all that's going on in the world right now, anyone really cares. Because, again, we see, to what Ninetales said, violence enacted against, or repression enacted from an oppressive class versus an oppressed class. And rarely ever has there been a time in history where you've had a movement for change and violence has not in some way, shape, or form been sparked. And that violence changed people's minds in many cases. Yes, you're going to have some pushback from some people, because there's going to be a lot of people. You're not going to be able to change. You're not going to be able to bring just about everybody over to your side. And I, in particular, I don't really care about that. Especially when you consider the way how far politics and political discourse in America has shifted
since the BLM protest and since George Floyd's death, that with also, you know, Bernie Sanders running and people finally knowing what the fuck socialism actually is to an extent, or democratic socialism, sock dem shit, whatever. Those things have drastically shifted America, I guess you can say, to the left. But then you still have a very fringe sort of minority that still doesn't give a fuck, doesn't seem to care, thinks that, you know, black people are still these violent pieces of shit, okay? And I don't care if those people look at my movement or look at my movements and say, oh, it's a bit too violent. I don't care, because those people are lost to me. I don't really care about optics when it comes to them, okay? Now, also, there was a point to what Flo Trace said about, you know, you don't think things have gotten that far? Can I ask you, this might seem idful of me, but are you white or white passing?
Yeah. I'm all the things.
Okay. I mean, you guys can laugh if you want to, but there's something to be said there. It's really funny how a lot of the people on this panel right now that are saying like, oh, well, you know, you're being a little bit too much, or, you know, I don't think this time has
Joe Lewis.
I don't think this time has I don't think this time that times have gotten this far, have gotten to the point where they warrant said reactions. It's just very telling to me, and your privilege is very much on display. I know people are gonna laugh at me and hate the fact that I say that, but it's the truth. Your privilege is
scared of it.
Less privileged right away. So that I'm allowed to have arguments on Twitch.
I mean, you have the luxury of talking about movements not in terms of state violence.
How about this? We're all literally on the internet, on Twitch, arguing about politics right now. We're all privileged sons of bitches right now. I'll let you know that.
Relatively speaking, but it's not an equal thing.
I mean, it's not like your reproductive rights are
all
being
not equal. True.
Stomped all over Professor Meat. You know, I mean, so no. Apparently,
you can only handle the dumb arguments.
Really quickly, Eli, and then we.
I'm almost done. Almost done. I just want to know, for the people who think that we have not gotten to the point where, you know, riots are justified, or not even riots, but like to the point where people should feel, you know, feel a certain way about what's going on right now, where is the line? Where do you draw it? Do we have to have literal fucking, you know, red armband, full suit Nazis marching through the streets? Do we have to have black people hanging from telephone poles again, or from trees, like just by the truckload? Do we have to have women just, you know, snatched out of their cars and just raped on the sidewalk?
Holy hyperpower.
Yeah, you may not like it, Todd. You may not like it, but like that is what people are saying the line is here, unironically.
Really, that's the fucking line that people are coming with. They want black people.
Yeah, people are saying we don't live in Nazi Germany.
Just real quick, stay away from the toss stuff, right? Like, just don't get near that line. Like, we're just shouting things out. Let's not get clipped and chipped.
People are literally saying that like Nazism is the line where like without that it's like the violent protest isn't. Okay, I'm pretty sure.
Eli actually posed a fucking very fair question.
Nobody says that.
Okay.
Zero people.
So
I know Red-Headed Man wanted in real quick. Red-Headed Man, make it quick, and then Lactoid.
Yeah, voting. That would probably be the line. As far as like you have a population in which you have a hyper-partisan group, two hyper-partisan groups, but in the United States, less than like 60% of people vote, and mostly. As a society on a whole, they are leaning more towards progressive democratic values in some polling. You have that opportunity. It's really.
I'm sorry. I get what you're saying, and I agree. But when I was asking my question, like, where do we draw the line? I was asking, like, where's the line for when it's okay to riot? Because I can tell you this right now. Based off of a lot of rhetoric, and this isn't to you, Redhead Man. This is to the entire panel. From what I've heard on this panel, like, I'm gonna just be real with y'all. I'm kind of scared because I guess it has to get to the point of what I was saying before you know action is actually taken. But Redhead Man, I agree with you.
Yeah, and this is the crucial part, because I think Flo Trace had brought up an example of like what could have Jews done in Germany at that time, right? Like Jews couldn't have done jack fucking shit, and that's the problem, is because they become hyper discriminated against, kind of like scapegoated into the idea of right, exactly. So when we talk about the appearance of like optics, you're fighting against that point in the voting booth right there. And that's why your optics and why we would view violent riots as being bad optically, therefore able to scapegoat those people that are causing those riots as being like, hey, they're causing these fucking problems. It's a terrible fucking balance. And again, I can't experience the same level of discrimination as you, nor will I be affected in the same way of Roe v. Wade. But I can sit here and tell you that most people don't like the progress in where this is going. So to sit there and go to this hyperbolic level is scary for me because it feels like defeatism when you have an opportunity to win.
It's not defeatism. Defeatism is assuming that like we can only stop at a certain point because optics or respectability politics. This is saying that we need to keep the doors open when we analyze things to not just viewing riots or like higher degrees of protests that cause pressure to be inherently violent by bad people. And all we're trying to do is say, look, not everybody can fight for their rights inside the system. And we have to be willing to accept
That's not true.
The Boston Tea Party, you know, like we fucked the Boston Tea Party. That wasn't inside
Boston,
the
you may not like that.
Riot shit,
it was incredibly degraded by the leaders of the time. The Boston Tea Party is the worst example you can
I can explain this.
May I respond to Redhead?
Okay, yeah, I understand you can, but we have.
What the hell?
At least we can all agree that I could if I wanted to.
You could if you wanted. You're a very smart man, Professor Meat. No one is downing that.
That's all I'm here for.
Blackoid, and then I have a question for the panel. And don't worry, you'll all yell some more and rebel against me, and you're protesting against the moderation here. So I'm going to have to oppress you even harder if you continue to do so. So please
vote on it.
Okay.
Oppress
I'll
me.
make it super quick. Optics, I agree, stupid argument. Idbull, I think is stupid. And then flow trace, really I just wanted to address what you said, because I think what you said was interesting, right? I mean, war is an example of where we suspend our morality in order to engage in a pure Machiavellian show of power to establish ourselves over other people. That said, even though the motive of war absolutely does matter, how you conduct yourself in war also matters, right? If you target innocent non-combatants during war, like Russia's doing, like we agree that it is so much more disgusting in the manner of which it's been conducted than if you were to just target like the political power structure in which you're opposing. So
absolutely.
And so what I would say is that, and this is controversial, like they're both really, really bad, but in a way, January 6th then was actually conducted more ethically than the BLM riots were, right? Because the BLM riots targeted innocent people and burned down their shit, while the January 6th just targeted the government, right? Which, if we're talking about warfare, I mean, as long as the analogy holds. Now, both are obviously horrible because I do support
because I
do support the institutions.
I want to respond.
Okay, because I do support the institutions of the United States of America.
Thank you for the gift subs. So, and if you guys want to support the community and you liking this content, give me money and engage in capitalism. So thank you. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, like, I do support
money.
the institutions of the United States of America.
Give me subs.
I think it's horrible and disgusting January 6th. I think it's horrible and disgusting to intimidate Supreme Court justices.
I don't care what this
but if we're going with the
says.
warfare analogy, BLM is worse than Jan 6th. It just is.
There are regulars here.
Nine-Tails, Professor Meat, Eli. Nine-Tails, Professor Meat, Eli.
Yeah, I just want to point out that BLM did actually try to oppose the exact same institution with means that we could have assumed could have approached January 6th, but they were faced with a much different kind of resistance from the government than January 6th protesters were by like a long shot. Okay, so if you want to say that like, oh, BLM, they should have just gone to the government, I think they tried that, and I'm pretty sure like the systemic prejudice against them enforced by the state through the police was on display.
They shot a January 6th protester.
So I want to respond to that. I want to respond to the BLM thing.
With a gun.
Can I ask
stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Can I
think it was bad.
Lactoid, can I ask you a question?
Am I white? I am.
No, fuck off. Do you know when Black Lives Matter started? Do you know when the organization was founded?
It was, yeah, without looking it up, I think it was sometime around the shooting of Mike Brown. Am I correct?
It was Michael Brown. It was St. Louis, or
which was fake news, by the way.
Yes, it's a complete fucking a misnomer. It's a complete fabrication of the actual facts. And amazingly, that organization has now devolved into something that we're comparing to the January 6th riots.
Can we mute the racist, please? Can we just mute him?
Yeah, true.
The racist? Hey,
no,
Monty.
I'm the only one that's allowed to get
Monty?
muted on this.
Eli Monty is
Thank you very
rhetorically
much.
rioting right now. He's
Well,
out of
Oh
he's
my
rocking the
God.
white nationalist shit behind him, so.
Wick, are you gonna let that stand?
Todd,
Wick,
Todd, stop.
terror.
Todd, stop. I will remind people, attack people's points, not each other, please.
No, Wick,
Eli.
you know who? Wick, come on, man.
I'm reprimanding him right now, Todd. I'm telling him not to do that.
Yeah, and I said I was sorry.
And Eli, and he
you're
apologized.
sorry?
Eli has to finish
Dude's
his
rocking a
point.
white nationalist flag
He did
behind him.
apologize.
What the
Anyways,
fuck
he's
are they
apologizing.
talking about? That's what he
All
is.
right, I'm surprised, Jude. I'm surprised Lactoid and the other guy have some semblance of knowing that. Anyways, so here's the thing, though, right? When you compare January 6th to the BLM protest, the thing is, January 6th was planned. Okay, that was planned out. The thing is, with the Black Lives Matter protest, the reason why there were buildings and shit that was burned down or whatever, or things that were ransacked or what have you, was because people took to the street as soon as they found out that news had happened. These were impromptu protests where people and where groups, communities of people rose up in defiance. There's the difference right there. Is it a tragedy? Yes. That things were burned down? Yes. But I just find it really funny how some of the people on this panel want to focus on the fact that shit got burned down in the BLM protest and don't want to focus on the reason why the protest happened.
We're talking about protests, not riots. They switched it up.
Between our protest and what happened on
That's what I said
January
earlier.
6th. You can throw your headset if you want to, but it's the truth. There is clearly a difference between throwing a fit because you didn't get your way over an election, you didn't get the cupcake you wanted, versus throwing a fit because now there's a family or there are families without family members. And I would very much appreciate it. I would very much appreciate it as the only black person on this panel, as far as I can tell, if people would stop trying to make a comparison between these two things because they literally are not comparable. Yes, both of them were riots, but that's literally where the similarities end.
Right, but the thing is throughout the course of this panel,
there really is no thing, though.
Nobody died voting for the president. Nobody died voting for the president.
The reason that these things get brought up is because we try to present you descriptively with the inconsistencies in your argument. You guys, other people on the panel, have asked for examples. So we give examples of the inconsistency of your argument. That doesn't mean they have to be one-to-one comparisons where they're exactly the same. That's the purpose of an analogy, is to draw comparisons between two disparate things. All right, that's
we don't need examples. Like I can point to how you rely on assumptions.
No one asked for examples for me for the rest of this panel because it's been done several times, and then I've been criticized for providing the examples.
Come on,
I'm just saying when your assumptions are so bad that like people can be like, "That's ridiculous. These things are incomparable." Then like we don't need examples. You need a better.
You're just criticizing the concept of an analogy.
We don't need examples. You need a better whataboutism.
This is how analogies work. There's two different things with different.
We understand how analogies work.
Not all of us, apparently.
Okay, so I do want to kind of move the topic
Some
along.
of us are just really bad at arguing our points.
This has really been an interesting discussion. This has been fire. I really appreciate you and the energy everyone here is bringing. And mostly polite, with a few exceptions, but mostly polite. I'm looking at you, Todd.
Shut up, Wick. I refuse to be polite.
I know you do. So I guess my question here is, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the protests, however you feel about them, in front of Supreme Court Justice's house, what is the intent here? What do you want to have happen? Like, do you think that protests overall throughout history have been largely effective, or have they been mostly performative? Like, what do we think of this, gang? Lactoid, and then
general.
Oh, okay, so
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so I think I understand the question, right? What I would say is, it's obvious. Supreme Court is not supposed to be open to the will of the people. It's not supposed to be influenced by protests, right? So the only motivation for protesting outside their house would be intimidation. Because like What are you going to do? Like try to convince them to change? That's not how the Supreme Court works. You're trying to intimidate them.
I don't know. I might question that a little bit.
Judicial philosophy.
Red Hand Man, like, what
Yeah,
would
yeah.
be the point? What's the
Speechless.
point?
Red Hand Man just nuked us.
The point is to continue to bring awareness to the issue.
Right.
And the point is that
and that would be
protesting, yes, historically does work when it's coupled with other movement and action items such as petitioning for legislation and doing the work behind the scenes and on your local levels. Yes, protesting works as a fucking part of a broader set of tools that you should have in your political tool belt. Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess the problem that I'm
I'll let you finish, Redhead. I'll let you finish, but then Ninetales and Eli, go.
I guess the problem that I'm having is kind of like having an understanding of like protest is pretty fundamental. Protesting of judges doesn't seem to be too far out there as far as like an expression of one's will to public figures and to members of the government. Doesn't seem like it's that far out there. I could agree with you in the way of like it may look as though it has the appearance of like intimidation. I don't know if it has the functionality of intimidation. In the ideas of what I mean by this is if you are frustrated with your appointed officials, and maybe I have a little bit difference because we do vote on our judges here in Nebraska, so that may be a little bit different. And it is an acknowledgement of like, hey, these are politically appointed people to that position.
Yep.
I don't know if it necessarily qualifies as intimidation.
I just want to say, if I had 100 Eli Montes outside my house, I had mad at me, I'd be terrified.
I hope you do.
I think that's good. Okay.
I would open my phone and
Can I have my response?
Yeah, Ninetales, then Eli.
Anybody at some.
I think that's good, actually. I think when you sign up for positions of power, it should be like a reasonable trade-off that like the people who you have dominance over, you should be accountable to. Now, and we have shown through capitalism that we cannot necessarily rely on the state to use this accountability. We cannot necessarily rely on electoralist democracy
you haven't shown
to make
that.
these
you have
things
a theory
work.
Of that.
Yeah, you haven't demonstrated that. Violence is not.
I mean, you really don't want capitalism to be a legacy of that. I'm trying to finish. I'm trying to finish. No, you're right. You're right. But it is a way. It is a way for communities to have power.
Yeah, sure.
Eli,
Unoptimal and criticizable way, given there are better alternatives. Apparently.
Yeah, your
Eli
preferences are
needs
noted,
to
but that's all they
vote.
are. It's just your own preferences.
Well, but you agreed with my justifications for my preference.
Eli.
Well, Professor Mead, if people don't protest, what the fuck do they do?
I didn't say don't protest.
Vote. God, please
Protesting is
vote.
good.
God,
I
please
think
vote.
that just in society, to be fair, I think that your positions are different from a lot of other people's positions that are somewhat from your
I just wanted to say, let me chat. If I don't do it, remind me to talk about the voting thing that Meat just said. But anyways, so I think Wick, the question that you asked, I think goes along with what I was saying earlier about how I don't necessarily think that there's ever been a movement throughout history where violence has not been enacted in some way, shape, or in some way, shape, or form. But if you don't mind, there was other parts of your question. Can you just restate it for me really quickly?
If I had written it down, I would, my friend. But I guess the question is, what are they effective? Are protests effective? Do we think that what do we want to accomplish in this particular case with Roe v. Wade? And
Center is not Eli Monty. He's dope.
Go on. Was that pretty much it, gang?
No, what you asked was what are the motivations here?
Sure.
Okay. So I think honestly, I think in many cases protests are performative. I think in many cases, a lot of times where protests are just as performative as flying a BLM flag out your window or having an LGBTQ bumper sticker or the Punisher on the side of your
Eli
Jeep,
Monty.
right? I think all that is pretty freaking performative. I think if anything, what needs to happen is that we need to have like actual boots on the ground sort of like activism. Like I'm an activist. For a day job, I'm also pretty much an activist. I help the homeless get off the streets and into housing and connected to mental health services, all that kind of stuff.
That's
right?
awesome.
I do
I think in many cases the community, if anything, just really needs to band together and just show that, like, you know, there's more of us than there are. We need to have a Bug's Life moment, you know. There's more of us than there are of the freaking grasshoppers. And if anything, I do think that, like, intimidation is valid because, again, these people we're talking about in many cases. All right, just listen for a second, right? We're talking about a lot of people, or a handful of people who. There really is
Look at the
very
groiper
little
up there
to
getting
no
all fucking animated and weird.
that they're taking, the violence that they're taking, not necessarily physical violence, but systemic violence that they're taking against people, against marginalized groups in America, right? So, yeah, you can only appeal to these types of people by playing their game for so long, and then eventually you gotta just flip the table. You gotta turn the chessboard around and play with the winning pieces at some point. You gotta flip it over at some point. You gotta take action and you gotta stand up before things get way too out of hand. Because in my opinion, they're already getting to that point where things are too far gone. They're too out of hand. And if anything, me personally, I want to put the fear of God into these people. I want these legislators and these Supreme Court justices. You're laughing at me, Lactoid, but I am being 100% serious. I want these people to look at the proletariat and go, damn, if we want to, like, keep this whole thing going where we're on top, or not even where they're on top, where they don't end up, you know, in bad conditions, well, then they're going to have to start, you know, adhering to what we're saying, because they haven't been. We've been
by violent revolution, Monty?
Wait.
By violent revolution?
Let him finish. Keep it
How is that?
Like, I live in Ohio. We've been voting.
How is it?
Like, I love what Meat said about voting, right? Like, I do agree to some extent you have to vote, but it cannot end there. We also have to do, again, boots on the ground activism, boots on the ground action. We have to be, you know, I think it's good to be out front of these people's homes so they know we freaking mean business, okay? Because what we've been doing so far has not really been working. We've been voting, yes, in gerrymandered districts. We voted people in office who they get into office and they write on these tickets. Joe Biden, very good example. They write on these tickets of being progressive candidates that are for the people, and then they get into office, and then what are they doing? They're bending over backwards, showing their buttholes for the Republicans to go inside of.
Yeah,
like,
I know. Kirsten Sinema,
the most popular president of all time. The most
Everyone
popular
watching
president of all time. Why
Okay.
the fuck do you think he's bending his back backwards? Do you think that's maybe
Todd,
because
we'll
that's
put
what
you in
his
line.
fucking...
Todd, we'll put you in line, but
Me too,
you gotta be respectful, okay? So Meat, Flowtrace, Jason, and then Lactoid and Todd.
And
Knight.
everybody, and almost everybody, basically.
Almost everyone. Okay, so go ahead, Meat, Flowtrace, Jason, and then.
Yeah, so I'll just say real quick. I'll try to be real quick because, like, it's hard to even track the argument because I'm not sure how much of an argument there even is here. It seems like people are mostly mad at each other. But, like, I'll try to focus on the most coherent thing I could hear is this justification of threat of violence, of being a good tool to use against others. I understand that I'm not sure if Jason's side thinks that, but there's at least two people here that are defending that position. So I'll just say the thing is that, like, oh God, there's so many problems. Loosely speaking, if we're talking about using threat of violence against those particular people, this is sort of what Lactoid was getting at, is that the Supreme Court is doing their job. If we're agreeing that we don't want the Supreme Court to be a political entity, that is inconsistent with the idea that we should try to leverage threat of violence against them. Fundamentally, if we have a problem with the way the Supreme Court is operating, we need to be protesting our institutions that exist. If that's the problem that we have with the Supreme Court, then we have a problem not with Supreme Court justices fundamentally, because this is an issue, at least possibly, of constitutional conservatism and constitutional originality and things like that. So really, if you want the thing you're trying to process to be consistent with the complaint you have, you should be not trying to impose a threat against the justice, but you should be trying to target in some way with your protest the criticism that your protest should be painting should be a criticism of in some way of the underlying structures that are supposed to manage and mitigate the degrees to which the Supreme Court is a political entity.
So just to respond super quick, I just want to point out that Supreme Court justices are the institution. They're also the primary power holders of that institution. So if you were to address the institution, you'd probably want to address the Supreme Court justices.
Right. I also wanted to point out with that,
only depending on your criticism of Roe v. Wade, but that's the thing. This is why I'm saying, like, this is just an inconsistency in the position, right? Is that if your problem is that the Supreme Court, you don't want the Supreme Court to be a political entity, then that is
not my
inconsistent
problem.
with the-
But it already is, so
well,
you
then
have
it's
to
some
work within the
people's problem.
dynamic that it currently exists in. If it wasn't already a political entity, then you could make that argument. But it currently is acting as such, and that's prevalent by the people who are being appointed as justices.
So this is why, like, I think that your disagreements with me would be different from a lot of people's disagreements when we got into the nuance, Jason. But I'll just say to that, the thing is that, like, I can't buy in to this idea. I can't buy into the idea that, like, oh, it has become a political entity. I do think that that the decision that the justices made do reveal a political decision that well, listen, I believe that the decision of Roe v. Wade was an overreach of constitutional conservatism. But I'm not willing to just say that there's no way it couldn't have been a decision rested in anything, that it must have necessarily just been this, like, borderline cabal of just people saying, hey, this is just our political line, so this is how we're going to do it just because we want to control women or we want to fuck them over. There's a constitutional conservative, a constitutional religionist argument to be made here. And this alarmist, and it's all just to finish up, I'll say, I think there's some merits to this argument for those reasons, but not to the extent to where you can say, oh no, it has now become political. Now it is a huge problem. Because if that's going to be your complaint, if your complaint is that it become too political, then your complaint isn't with the individual justices, because this has always been political to some degree, whether we realize it or not. It's always been a participant in a political body.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we got to move on. So Flowtrace, Jason, and then I believe it was Lactoid. I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess that's mostly to Lactoid's point. I think the Supreme Court is supposed to be insulated from public opinion to a much greater degree than the rest of our government. But I don't think it's supposed to be entirely divorced. I mean, obviously they're still appointed by the president, they're approved by Congress, and I think the founding fathers, or at least some of them, were very much of the mind of Nixon going to China, in the sense that they understood that it would be better for the Constitution to bend to the society rather than break, so that they at least still be part of the question. And I think, fundamentally, if we want the Supreme Court to exist, it is going to need to be somewhat related to our society. Because I do think there is a certain point, sort of to Monty's point, I think there is a level where if the Supreme Court started doing certain things and was so insulated that we could do nothing about it, then I think you could reach a sufficient level of dissatisfaction that people would be seeking to just remove it. It is better that we make the Supreme Court palatable and less pure so that we can keep it, rather than incredibly pure but so unpalatable that it will not be tenable to maintain the institution. And I think that is something that's really important. I guess I think that these protests outside of the Supreme Court's Justice House are absolutely imitation. But I do think there is a steelman hypothetical way that you could protest outside of a Justice House that wouldn't be based in the intent to intimidate. That being said, it's a very tenuous hypothetical, and I think this panel kind of demonstrates it's not at all what the conversation today we're having is about. But I do think it's important to remember that the Supreme Court is supposed to be, not responsible to the people in the way that our directly elected representatives are, but is still part of our society. They are not in a vacuum totally detached. And I do think it's fair to, people be willing to express their discontent or disagreement about that, even if we think that this specific form of expression is bad and shouldn't be done.
Wait. Real quick.
Respond, and then Jason's stuff.
I just disagree, right? In terms of my judicial philosophy, I think you're incorrect, right? Once Supreme Court justices are in, they should be insulated from political influence and partisan agendas, right? This is why they're for life appointment, right? The idea of the tenure is to protect them from this. There are ways for the government to get around it. You can change the Constitution. If you don't like the way the court has ruled in the Constitution, you can change it. There is a mechanism, and it's certainly not intimidating justices.
Yeah, but I don't think necessarily the idea of that the life term appointment, that in of itself is that protection. I don't think it's enshrined the idea of they cannot be protested against, right? Like that was the protection, not they can't be protested against.
No. It outlines the purpose of the Supreme Court, right? And now that we've established
in
the purpose
Article 3.
Right, now that we've established the purpose here of that branch of government, which is to interpret the Constitution and be outside of the influence of political partisanism, right? We know that when you intimidate them, you're going against the intent. You're going against why they exist.
Might be a little intimidated.
Then why is Clarence Thomas's wife hanging out at the Trump White House and helping with the insurrection?
Hey, so it is Jason's turn. So Jason, you can have your say here. And then I believe Redhead, Ninetails, and
I was next.
Oh, Lactoid. Okay.
And then I was after Ninetails.
I'll go next.
This is
it's Jason's turn.
After that,
I haven't done a while.
Jason's turn, and then it's Lactoid, and then Ninetails, then Redhead. Go.
Okay, so this nonsense about these justices being apolitical or whatever. I mean, Clarence Thompson's wife was fucking part of like the whole insurrection and fucking rally at the fucking Capitol shit. She worked with Ali Alexander and all these fucking people. So you can't tell me that there's a disconnection. There just simply isn't. There's not a disconnection. They very much fall in line and do a lot of what the president's will is. If it's the president that suits their needs or their interests or, their own personal philosophical interests. You can't say it's not. It doesn't happen. That would be utter bullshit because we just saw it,
Well, we see it to an extent. I just think it's obvious that the thing is the way we separate powers, ideally, is supposed to manage these interests. Like, we arrange our government in such a way to limit the degree to which people will, have their self-interest be conflated with the policy that they enact or the ways they act as government body in the capacity of governmental bodies, and we try to limit those things in ways that will aid us, right? But we do recognize that it's still the case. So that's just why I say the idea that it's happening now. I actually don't think it happening now is a very accurate description of events, which is why I think that if that's going to be the kind of underlying criticism, I think that you sort of have to move that criticism to the way the institutions are arranged if you're going to make that criticism.
If it really was just about making sure that individual power didn't supersede the power that affects everybody, then I'm pretty sure a woman's right to her body wouldn't be under threat. It definitely these systems go far beyond what you're willing to admit. They definitely are here to maintain certain kinds of order and hegemony that serve the best interests of the ruling class. Maybe not in perfection, but in totality. In general, the idea that this is intimidation is also very weak. Yes, it is intimidation. Yes, you're using your voice and your presence to make it known that you have a certain form of power. But these people,
just real quick, Ninetales, I hate to interrupt.
Was it not my turn?
Another panel. Yeah, but a couple people have to go. They have another
I'm
panel.
one of the people who gotta go.
But I have to give them an outro and allow them to just kind of chill themselves. And I want to say I appreciate you for being here. I think Lactoid and Eli get to argue on Prime's panel tonight, so that will be fun. Yeah. So we'll go Lactoid, then Eli, and then we'll continue because I'm not done here, and I think we all have stuff to say.
Do I still get to finish after?
You do. After they get their outro, you get to finish. It's Ninetales directly after this, so please.
All right.
Lactoid.
So yeah,
Or can
my
they
name
find
is
you?
real quick outro. Name's Lactoid. Anti-Communism United on Discord and Twitch. Because I get to have my outro now, I'm going to take some parting shots, saying you guys aren't going to get to respond, so have fun with that. So, to Jason's point about Judge Thomas's wife, his wife is not him. I didn't know that a woman was subservient to the agenda of whatever man controls her. She's her own person, and he's his own person. What his wife does is irrelevant. To Wick's last question, me and Eli totally agree. This is a situation we totally agree on, right? We agree it's intimidation. He just thinks it's good. I think it's really, really bad. And I'm going to leave you all with the definition, Oxford definition of terrorism.
Oh shit, I'm calling you right now.
Use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. So I'll let you guys chew on that. I'm going to leave you all with the definition, Oxford definition of terrorism.
Check him out, gang. He's a great guy. I hope to have him on in the future.
Especially against civilians.
Great, even if I strongly disagree with a lot of his opinions. But yeah, great guy. Eli, please.
Yes, me. So, hi, my name is not Eli Monty. I am a leftist, pretty far left actually. All around, just real nerdy guy. In case you couldn't tell, Magic the Gathering, giant monster sort of enthusiast. If you want to check me out at Not Eli Monty. I'm from TikTok originally and branching out into the creator multiverse, I guess. I gotta head over to the Reverie if you guys want to see me there. I'm also streaming from my end as well. But yeah, twitch.tv/NotEliMonty. If you're a leftist or a member of a marginalized group, we would love to have you in our space. We are a safe space for them, but we do welcome just about anybody. But yeah, check me out. Not Eli Monty on everything. See ya.
Yeah, thanks again for being here, and we hope to have you in the future. Good luck on your.
Yeah, don't call me a fucking racist again, you stupid fuck. Bye.
You're definitely a racist.
Say racist shit then. Bye.
Okay. Well, ain't that great? But we are going to continue on for another 30 minutes or so.
On the way out.
Ninetales.
Wait, you can't go for the full hour, Wick, huh?
I'll go for however long I want to.
Can't keep it up. It's a little older. Years are winding
And I
down.
am a little older,
man.
so I need my naps. But yeah,
To be
Ninetales
fair,
too.
I couldn't even bring myself to stream today, so it's not like I can take it. So yeah, going back to this being intimidation, like, yes, it is about showing your numbers and showing your voice. But these people are so sheltered and isolated that they're definitely not going to be like changing their minds based on opinions anytime soon. They're the upper class. They're the upper up echelons of society. They are not at risk of people being on their lawn leading to an actual form of violence. I'm sorry, that is a slippery slope that's never going to be realized, at least under our current state.
Why wouldn't they? Rich people can still be subject to
Yeah,
violence.
I was gonna
What do you
say,
mean?
so rich people can't feel that. They
so
can't
you
feel
really
fear.
equivocate
Ninetales,
that.
Hey,
but you
Ninetales,
really,
hey, am I talking or are you?
No,
talking?
I didn't say they couldn't feel fear, and I'm actually responding
Hey,
to
am I
Meat.
talking or are
So
you
you can talk
talking?
all you want. I'm going to respond to Meat. So Meat, like,
Okay.
I agree that. Sorry, Meat, could you actually frame your question, because Todd is just so obnoxious.
So I was just going to say, it seems like it's the implications. It sounds like of your like it sounds like you're just I guess all I said is that like rich people, the ruling class, whatever, can still be subject to violence, including
Yeah,
from the
sure.
lower class.
And I wouldn't disagree with that. The problem is that,
So they can
again,
be threatened justifiably.
but
with
we
violence.
can also
it would
frame
be
this.
justifiable for them to feel threatened.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
not justifiable.
It would
Like
be
inherently,
reasonable.
not intrinsically. So if I'm not going to make the argument that every form of violence is reasonable because the
But
person
if
has
they're
power.
in danger, why shouldn't they feel threatened if they can be in danger?
I don't think that they're in danger. First, like that's the
But
first
you
part
just
of my
admitted
argument.
they could be, right?
Yeah,
Like,
but
it's
people
reasonable
being
for
on your
people-
lawn is not a form of danger.
It could be if they're all angry and gathering on your lawn. I'd be scared. Would you not?
Hey, but feeling
Well,
scared
you know what?
is different than being in a
also-
real danger.
They also ruled that
like I was in a
protesters can go on abortion providers' lawns and protest on their lawn. They did that in the Supreme Court. So you know what? They're getting a taste of their own fucking medicine. Don't give me no bullshit
Talking whether or not
about
it should
that.
be legal, though.
But you know what? The thing
still
is,
have to,
if
like-
they were willing to do that for abortion providers, then why shouldn't people do
Do
that
you remember
to
the
them?
case, Jason?
They should be legally
Can
allowed
I-
to. I do
Can
not.
I just
disagree with that.
quickly? I just wanted to get to the point that we have to also consider this proportional to the violence that like these states are capable of doing, which is a massive amount of violence. So when people say, "Hey, this is inherently violent," then when people are standing on their lawn saying, "Hey, stop this," that is like a minuscule amount of violence compared to the violence that happens when abortion is outlawed.
Violence isn't necessarily justified and reciprocal, correct?
No, I actually disagree. I think that using your voice in the face of a violent state is just going to empower the violent state because that's not actually a means that puts any pressure on them.
Okay.
What do you think is a means of applying pressure?
I'm not going to say anything isn't a means, like even voting and stuff like that. Like it's better that we don't cede the power of electoral politics to less progressive sides. So that's me being partisan, but also avoiding using partisan terms, just to be clear, because I'm a progressive and I'm an anarchist. So I can only speak about things into this term. So as a leftist, I think it's important that we get seats in office. But what I'm saying is we have to be open to the entire spectrum. And when we talk about and we respond to like the ways that people address these issues, we can't just say like, oh, is this what I would prefer happen? We have to say, we do have to be more nuanced in asking why are they doing this? Why do they feel like this is why do they feel like this is necessary?
I don't know if that's. Go ahead, Wick. It's fine.
No, it's fine. Finish your point.
Yeah, no,
and then
I don't know
then
if
I have
that's-
an announcement or something to say. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the way you want to react. I think it's completely fine and legitimate to draw a line at like subjugating violence, as in like I am violently forcing you to do my will. Instances of rape, instances of like threat of intimidation, where there's an immediate violent chance. Correct? Like I think we can draw some boundaries. As far as like a political movement, you can certainly draw your boundaries anywhere, and then by that you would then draw your boundaries as a society.
Okay, so we lost Half-Baked Takes. I think he rage quit. I'm not sure. He might have just had a disconnection issue or something.
Can I
He
just
left the
say-
group. Just let me.
Can I
let me
just
finish
say?
my announcement?
Oh,
and then
I wanted to apologize to him, but
Yeah. I hope that it's always a difficult job moderating. I hope that he understands that he is welcome to come back if he wants to. He does not have to. He will get a chance to speak. I'm trying to give as many people a chance to speak as I can. That said, since we do have a smaller panel now and we do have some room, if people want to hop on, if I can, I will turn
No,
this
Wick,
into...
we have a good flow. No, this is actually a good thing.
But if someone really wants to hop in, if you give me some money, if you give me some gift subs, I'll let you in. How's that? Anyway,
Oh, that's a new one, and that is evil, but I respect it.
Gotta respect.
Okay, I do want to apologize to Todd. I went too far, and when we were talking about things that he was saying with racial undertones, it turned to him being a racist, and I joined in on that, hoping that he'd get that I was half joking. I don't think he did, but yeah, you know, I've discussed police brutality with him. He wasn't inherently racist, so I shouldn't have said that, and I do apologize for being impulsive that way.
That's good.
Okay.
There we go.
Now back to it, gang. Okay, so I think if we've lost order here because all of you are changing positions, but I do believe that it was Professor Meat's turn.
Oh well, you see, where were we? I didn't have my hand. It's chaos.
You tried making a comparison that doesn't exist in reality. I'm actually.
What comparison?
I don't know. I'm actually just fucking with you.
Yeah, my brain got emptied by the beautiful apology.
Well, let me try this then. Let me try this. Let me bring it back. Okay, let me ground it once again. So when we come, regardless of the legality of what is legal and what is not to during protests, where for each of you, and this is a question for each of you, so I'd like you all to answer, where is too far? Let's say it's an issue you care deeply about, you feel is very valid, you feel is something that strikes at core values that you hold. At what point do you say, you know, even though this is going against me and I am no longer like, I don't feel I have a voice here. I feel like my you know, the will of the voters is turned in and it's gone against me. Where is too far when it comes to protesting this? What is too far?
I think the succinct answer is that, like, if you're just an individual, your wants cannot be represented by the system as a whole. But when there's an entire movement, then we have a whole different beast on our hands. And this is why, like, in my intro, I'm like, it's kind of sad that we don't treat freedom of protest with the same value of freedom of speech in general. Because if we did, I really don't think that the ruling class would have the sense of security it has when it does things against the people. In general, and that is a generalization, so please don't be like, who's the ruling class? What do they do? Blah, blah, blah. It's a generalization. And so I think that in terms of like legality, we should view the violence of protest as like, as long as it doesn't harm people directly, you should, as a protester, not harm people directly with your actions if you can be avoided. You should be accountable for when it does. And I don't think property damage counts. I'm sorry. You know, movements are responsible for damaging their communities, but they also don't get recognized often for the rebuilding they do afterwards. But in general, when we see movements that require damage to the system as a means to an end, I'm talking about putting pressure here, not as like a form of violence. Then there's a chance, and we have to honestly ask ourselves: is this the only way that they can achieve their ends? And I do think a great case for this are climate protectors and environmental protectors. They're not just fighting for themselves and their own personal ends. They also, a lot of those people talk about like feeling awful and absolutely dog shit about leaving future generations with a climate that's less and less stable and less livable. Mm-hmm. So they really do feel like this needs to be changed sooner rather than later. And if later was an option, democracy would make more sense. But yeah, so like it's a complicated thing is my point.
I think the analogy to freedom of speech demonstrates why I think you need to have a much more nuanced opinion of this, which is that just like freedom of speech, I think the right to protest should have limits in the same way that we would say, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? I don't think we should be justifying like burning down like stores or like private property like that.
I actually think personal property, I might agree with personal property, but when we define private property, that's not the same as personal property. So I'll fully agree with personal property. Private property, we're getting into, again, talking about systems that maintain corporate rule and the ruling class's hegemony.
I'm fine with that.
Well, I'm not fine with preventing means of actually putting pressure on the people who hold power.
No, so I actually find that it's more consistent with the way that we think about free speech than you might. I think those two things are more commensurate than you might think, because the principles by which we limit free speech is when it enters into territory that affects others in a way that we find unacceptable or untenable via whatever our principles are. And in the case of rioting, I think that, or the case of protesting, it's a similar kind of thing. When protesting begins to leverage like things in our society that we find untenable, like threat of violence, specifically, damage of personal property, things like this, violations of things that are yours, not others, whether it's your personal well-being or your property, it's property that may sometimes actually equate to your livelihood and well-being, in fact.
Oh, sorry.
These things we find worthwhile protecting. And so, yeah.
So I agree, again, like on a personal, individual level, and maybe like to a degree, assuming that the personal property doesn't reflect the systems of power, personal property. But when we're talking about like just like inanimate objects getting broken in abstract degrees of harm, compared to like what should be, if you're protesting to this degree, a very real degree of harm and no
like
abstractions.
Government buildings? Is that what you mean? Like, is that what?
If we want to bring government buildings into this, sure. We like those movements should be willing to admit, like, hey, if you attack a hospital, people can't get help. Like there are obvious repercussions to the actions in your communities, and I think a more responsive movement is more suited towards this than one that I'm not going to say BLM wasn't suited towards this, because they certainly did pick up the pace to like make amends for the rioters and stuff like that. But the movements that are more suited to actually directing their action properly instead of it being like this chaotic thing, those are the ones that we should consider more valid in their execution of applying pressure.
Right. So here's something.
I do, just real quick. I'll let you finish, Professor Meat, but I want to get the others in to answer this question as well. So finish, and then I want to hear from Jason, and then I want to hear from Redhead. So
yeah. So I'll just say, just something to loop back to earlier, because this is just where my mind goes off of that sort of the agreement that we have there in the abstract, which is that it touches on something you said earlier, actually, that I think that there's an agreement we've reached here that is rooted in some extent perhaps contradicting something you said earlier, which is what I'd like to push back again, which is that this idea that like we have to, it is justifiable because certain forms of protest and violence, quote unquote, because threat whatever, because there's no option left, because there is no other way. And while I agree that fundamentally, like, some people are going to be more represented than others in a democracy, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing always. The thing is that, like, insofar, this is the consistency, because we agreed in the abstract there's some justifications, right, that you could make for rioting in the abstract or violent protests, etc. But
it's and I just want to point out, I also did agree that there are justifications to limit the freedom of protest.
Right. So this is why, yeah, exactly. So, but that's why I wanted to point out that, like, those justifications, when I'm trying to point out the inconsistencies in our positions, I guess what I would just say is that the point at which violence starts to become justified is when, in fact, you don't have any other way to influence change, and in fact, there's just you're just fundamentally not being represented at all. No change is ever going to happen, and it is the will of the people. Like, the government is just fundamentally oppressing the people. However, the thing is that you haven't this trying to say that we're currently in this space where fundamentally, like, groups have no way to influence change.
No. I'm not saying fundamentally. No, that is a mischaracterization.
Sure. Then let me rephrase.
Finish it up. We got to move on, please.
I got to be able to respond, though.
Sure, I can rephrase. I'll rephrase. I'll clarify, please. We don't have to respond to something. I'm happy to clarify. What was said, to some extent, or what was said, because now I literally had it in my brain, but then I got sidetracked a little bit by the interruption. What was said, as best I can remember, is something like we're dealing, or what was implied at least, is that we've been dealing with these problems and it hasn't been getting any better. Nothing's changed, so now people have no other choice. That is just not true. We have civil rights in our country's history have been successful in spite of, not because of, violent protest. And in current day, like, yeah, we still have our problems. Yeah, there's some ebbs and flows, but generally speaking, we're on an upwards trend. Like things are not just getting worse and worse if you track things over the decades. Like it's not, this like This isn't becoming just some huge problem where like more and more black, like what Eli Monty was talking about. There's no evidence that we're heading towards this place where black people are just going to start be hanging from trees on every street sign or something, right? Like all evidence that I can tell is that we're moving slowly and slowly away from that.
If I can't respond, then I have my hand up. Okay, so yeah, so it's not, you know, it's not like, it's not going to be the thing where if nobody does anything, we're suddenly there. It's not like that kind of a slippery slope argument. The argument is that particularly fundamentalist and radical conservatives / Republicans, quote unquote, and I'm talking about the particularly extreme ones, just inherently are fighting for this. Yeah, they're inherently fighting for this in the system right now. They by being within the system, they have more power than people who try to enter the system from beneath and try to fight it. If we are going to be able to defend against this, so it has no risk of getting to that point. And I think he's pointing to a risk, Eli is, not necessarily saying like, you know, you blink and then suddenly it's like that.
But if it's not a slippery slope, then it's not a risk, right?
Well, no. We're 2 steps away from the slippery slope, and it is determined by how much power they get.
We're on a slippery slope too.
Okay. I'm loving the back and forth. I really am. But we have to get more people in because we only got about 15 more minutes before I do the outro. So Jason, then Redhead. So the question originally was, how far is too far when it comes to protesting for things like civil rights?
Well, I mean, honestly, if your humanity is being taken from you and you're being forced to carry the child of somebody you've been raped by, or as a product of, you know, incest, I mean, I think that's pretty good reason to be at a state where you want to vociferously protest, if not be a little bit in riot mode. I don't think that we should get violent off the bat. I don't think that's a good answer to anything. I do think we should do our best to try to make some movements through legislation, you know, through our congressional leaders and you know, see if we can get, you know, the president to use the bully pulpit in conjunction with regular protests, peaceful protests. But if that's not working and we see these trigger laws go into effect and women are actually end up being affected by this stuff and we're seeing it real time and nothing's changing, then I think at that point you have to say, listen, these people's civil rights are not being met. Their civil rights are being violated. And at that point, you know, if we've tried everything else, then it's, you know, they've got to do what they got to do. You know, if they need to riot, if they need to break some shit to get noticed, to get the change, then at that point, that might be what they have to do. My concern is right now is that, you know, I don't see Dems doing much about it. I know my senator's Kirsten Sinema. She ain't doing shit, you know. She's sitting on her hands, you know.
Well, the bill just got blocked by, what was it? The one, I think it had
Manchin.
Was
yeah.
it Democrat or Republican?
It was a Democrat. It was Joe Manchin. And Kirsten Sinema's usually on board with that kind of shit. She wouldn't have gone with overruling the filibuster. So there's that. So I think that, you know, when people see that there's a bunch of feckless legislators, they're seeing a Supreme Court that wants to take women's civil rights back over 50 years, not to mention the effect that that ruling can have on both gay marriage and trans rights, because it was used as a basis for these other rulings. You know, it brings a lot back into question, and we're seriously talking about a major encroachment on people's civil rights that do extend further than just women. But, you know, overall, yeah. I mean, there's going to be a point at which if this isn't rectified, people are going to have to do something. And that may mean, yeah, you know, more intensified protesting, you know.
I want to respond, but I know that Wick's trying to let other people talk before we end it.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to signal to the audience what a kind and generous participant I am.
How virtuous of a signal that you just put out.
Thank you.
Redhead, I want to let you have a choice, and then yes, you can respond. So.
Here, let me bite into the apple of like realistic depression and the possibility for our future. As our cis white male, right here representing, I think it is important to acknowledge the idea and the causation that this ruling is going to have, as Jason kind of pointed out, that is fundamental to a series of other rights that textualists don't necessarily don't believe are enumerated or should be implied. And I'm going to take a shot at you here, Professor Meat, and I think you'll find it pretty grounded. I worry this idea that we have, and it's something that I do believe in as well too, but when I look into the future, I worry the idea of like, this clock isn't always moving forward, right? Human advancement isn't always, we're not just getting more and more progressive. We're not just always going to have more and more rights and everything.
I think we kind of are. It seems to me like
well, then here, let me finish the argument and you will understand the point that I'm making. It isn't always necessarily going to happen like that, and it's going to become harder and harder in the days that I see coming forward if science is to be believed in our idea of resource scarcity and our idea of climate change affecting how all people live, you know, from X amount of people living on the coast, millions, most of our population. As climate change becomes more and more aggressive, as flooding gets more and more increased, as farming becomes more and more difficult, you are going to notice a tightening of restrictions. You are going to notice a alienation of what we would consider minorities for the idea of resource scarcity. This is highly problematic, especially if we don't have very codified and very solid civil liberties defined within our Constitution and within our law. So to sit here and say that, you know, while it may seem...
I get what you're saying, but the thing is, like, this idea of resource scarcity becoming this huge problem, inability to, like, provide food for the population, etc., like, on just when you look into these types of issues, like the only real way you could justify these fears is like in a far-flung, like dystopian society.
No,
like
it's not far-flung because climate change.
No, it absolutely is.
Climate change will destroy our ability to logistically be able to provide food, even on smaller scales than we already have. So, like, if we're talking about these things, yes, when climate change causes, when climate change causes,
we can. But what you have to notice right now is the complete interruption of our supply chain that is happening at this very moment, just in between the war.
We're getting better and better. So, but that's a different argument than climate change. Climate change is going to destroy supply chains?
Yes, because it becomes foundational. Of just between the war in Ukraine and Russia, who are two of the world's most largest wheat producers. You're going to notice these things are going to happen far and far closer and closer, and they're becoming more and more dramatic. No, the example would be okay. So your example would be how Russia and Ukraine,
dude, like, what is he fucking on, man?
Correct? Okay. So in this war example, we can see how it has affected the rest of the world and how in this heightened state of capitalism and specialization through different nations, you're going to run into more and more problems when you have specialized nations that are going to experience climate change and be more affected by them. It becomes problematic.
But if
he's a Destiny lefty, like he's
sort of
not
saying,
lefty
like,
anymore because he's following
in that
Destiny.
example that you gave, like, you haven't given that example that you gave does not contain a world in which, because of climate change, there is now this inability to provide food for the world.
It contains the example. The reason the example is given is because we live in a specialized world, just like the baby shortage, the baby formula shortage, right? 3 companies in the United States use and make baby formula. If they experience a problem, no matter how small or minute, you're going to experience a huge supply chain issue. And if it becomes globalized, if it becomes problematic in a sense of how you actually make an integral part of the product, it's only going to exacerbate in the example of climate change. Does that make sense?
Like, in theory, I get the idea. It's
Well,
just
it's not theory.
No, hold on.
It's very much functional.
Well, hold on. I'll. That's the second part of my sentence, which is that
It's
in theory, I
practically
get
what
the
it
idea.
is what's
but where I
happening.
disagree is in practice. The idea, like, I get the concept
It's
of
what's
there being
happening
some
right
people that are going to be
now.
more disparately affected by climate change than others. But the thing is, like, I understand there are shortages right now in the world, but generally speaking, the more industrialized, the more progressive we get, our ability to manage these supply chains gets better and better and better. And even though, while I can admit to the theory of what you're saying, that's far different. Being able to admit to the theory of what you're saying to an extent is far different from buying into the idea that we're anywhere near a situation, even given a climate catastrophe to some extent, or increasing problems of climate change. That's very far from saying that is going to cause some like catastrophic inability of us to like get ourselves to exist.
Okay. We got to move on a little bit. So we want to get Nine Tails in, and Half Baked Takes is back. And so welcome back, Half Baked.
I just did, Killer.
You didn't. You lost track of your own argument. You went in a circle.
No, because you didn't understand the argument in which it was.
No, you don't understand your own argument.
You both are circling right now.
I literally revamped your whole argument for you, and you agreed the whole way.
Yes, because you're not agreeing to the idea that if
because maybe I think your argument is bullshit. You don't have a literally understanding of the literally no. You can't say that because you literally agreed with me in every single step of the way when I described your argument. And I said
so what do you think
carry
our
with the
source of
implication of your
disagreement
conclusion.
is? What do you think our source of disagreement here is?
What do you think our source of disagreement here is?
I am not explaining.
What do you think our source of disagreement here is?
Maybe that's it. But our source of disagreement is that I don't think your explanation, which we can agree that I understand.
We are in the woods, by the way,
your conclusion.
regarding this topic, and I do want to reel it back.
That's fair.
I do want to reel it back because regardless of how extreme the actual impacts of climate change are, it is going to make people have to fight against each other and compete more and fight the system. So when we're what I think the ultimate point that
the white nationalists came back.
Other people are here, or maybe Jason's trying to make, is that when it comes time to fight for those things, more people will die and suffer if we can't actually get the system to change to a format where it actually serves the people.
So, Half Baked Takes, welcome back. If you have some stuff to say, now's the time. And then we're going to go into closing statements. And I'll give it an outro to everyone here. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate it. So, yeah.
No, we're good. I don't appreciate getting called a racist. I feel like I've proven myself to not be that over the course of several conversations. But I don't know where the conversation has gone, so I'll step back. But I'll give my outro real quick. I'm Half Baked Takes. You can find me on fucking Twitch and YouTube. Half Baked Takes. Appreciate you, Wick. Everybody on the panel. Sorry if I was an asshole. It was a very heated conversation. I probably shouldn't have interjected as much as I did. I probably shouldn't have been a fucking piece of shit several times. But, that's the blood sports of all of this.
Likewise. Likewise. And I just hope it was some ribbing that I was trying to do. I wasn't, but it was probably irresponsible to do on a public space. So.
It just I just don't want my reputation getting fucking, because I put my real ass name out here, and I also work for a congressional, I work for a congressman, so there's a lot of shit that I don't want assumed upon me by assumptions from people on a panel. So I appreciate Nine Tails. Thank you for the apology. I wholeheartedly love our conversations. I know we disagree. Everybody on this panel, if we disagree, I love that. That's the whole point of this. But when we toss out accusations like that, it can ruin people's fucking lives and ruin their reputations. I just don't like that.
Okay. So I am going to give everyone an outro as well. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of this. This was honestly a lot more spicy than I thought it was going to be. This started off out the gate. It got heated. It was interesting. It was entertaining, and I hope people liked it. To my audience, if you did like it, you can follow or sub to the channel, and those are both appreciated. What's going to happen now is again, I'm going to give everyone an outro, and then we're going to raid out to who's going to still stream after this. Okay, we'll
I
raid
will
out
still be streaming
Jason
for a little bit.
raid out
fine.
into Jason's society. I haven't raided him before, so this will be my first time.
Okay,
I'll
okay.
try to be gentle. But Tuesday, just a little bit of what's coming up on my channel. Tuesday, we have the open call-in show. That's tomorrow, gang, at 6 p.m. Eastern, with my lovely co-host Kaylee Marie, and we are here to take your calls, and you can talk to us about whatever you like. We keep it open to this community day here at the Death of Certainty show, where people talk about whatever they want to talk about. So please. Thursday, we have Katie Doe is coming on for an interview. That should be fun. And then Friday's our big one, gang. We have a slew of lovely guests. I can't name them all because not all of them have confirmed. But one of them that has confirmed is Prime Kai. Prime Kai is going to be coming on my show, and I will be able to mute him if he gets out of line. So that'll be fun. And we're going to be talking about platforming with a twist. When is it appropriate? Is it ever appropriate to platform people who are suffering some sort of mental distress, whether that be severe intoxication, or you know that the topic is causing them to have some sort of mental breakdown? At what point, even if they express that they want to stay on, at what point do you show them the door? Should be an interesting topic. So check that out, gang. But you know who else you should check out? All these lovely individuals here. So I'd ask you, once you give your outro, to also post your links in my chat so my audience can find you. So please, Flowtrace.
Yeah, my name is Flowtrace. You can check me out at twitch.tv/Flowtrace. I think it is very easy. It is a very easy mistake to make to not recognize how amazing the times we live in today are. That's not to say that there aren't horrible problems that are going on, awful problems that we should be outraged by and be furious about and be seeking to make change. But it's important to also take that in addition to taking a step back and realizing that this is probably the best 50 years that humans have ever lived in our entire history of our species, and that we need to simultaneously make sure that we maintain the great benefits that we have gotten from the people that came before us, while making sure that we don't rest on our laurels and still push forward and try to make the world a better place. And these are two ideas that are not mutually exclusive, but do have some tension. And that's the balance that I would most want people to take away from this. That yes, we need to be outraged, we need to be motivated to make the world a better place, and to stop the real horrible injustices that happen today. But simultaneously, we can't forget how lucky we are that the world is already so good, and to not take for granted that it is quite good. That's all I've got to say.
Remember to post your links where people can find you.
Will do.
So, Half Baked Takes, you post your links too, but you already had your outro, so we're going to move on to Jason's Society, please.
Yeah, hey, thank you very much. I am Jason Society, Jason_Society on Twitch. I stream about cannabis and politics and host Stonercast every Sunday with a lot of your favorite streamers. We get really stoned and have funny conversation, tell funny stories. That said, as far as this is concerned, I think that protest, I'm going to say again, I think protest is important in your tool belt for ensuring democracy. I do not think that protest alone is the answer. I think protest coupled with activating on your local level, trying to make changes in your local politics, and then working with your state and obviously federal legislators to get the change you want to see is also very important. It should be a multi-pronged approach, and if you really want to activate and change something, that's how you're going to get it done. But yeah, absolutely. I think that protests can also be a big part of that. They provide solidarity as well as bring awareness and show a seriousness about how people feel about the cause. I think that's those are all important things. So, thank you.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, check him out, gang, and we'll raid out to him as soon as we're done here. But really appreciate you. Really appreciate your perspective. Hope to have you again in the future.
For sure.
Professor Meat, please.
Yeah, Professor_Meat on Twitch. I guess, man, we covered a lot of fundamental stuff today, but I'll just say, you know, I'm tempted to get into all of the individual examples that we gave, particularly Roe v. Wade, that got talked about a lot for obvious reasons, and why these are, like, all the nature in which these are separate from other issues, but that would go on way too long. So, loosely speaking, I'll just say that, like, that basically, on a fundamental level, and we can get into the nuance, because it is a closing statement, but like, or someone could get into it with me later if they wanted, but just on a real loose fundamental level, the ways in which we the situations in which we justify violence, destruction of the state, like hands-on rebellion in a way that transcends what just a protest is. These situations, and this is historically borne out as well, especially in our country's history, these justifications exist within the scenarios in which the institutions at play must be themselves torn down because they no longer exist in a way in which we can interact with and further change that will reflect the will of the people. And that, I do not believe, is a description that represents the society we currently are within, which is why generally speaking, we don't like violent protests. We don't like threats of violence. We don't like destruction of property in the form of civil protest, and it also makes your protest ineffective, I think. Yeah, Professor Underscore gonna be on Twitch, Sword and Shield of the Base and the Righteous. Thanks for having me. I'll be spitting fire every time I come online, so come check me out if you like this kind of shit.
Yeah, check him out, gang. He's a great guest. We have him on a lot for a reason. I consider him a friend. He's a great guy, even if I do disagree with him sometimes. And I do try to moderate him and make sure that he's contained in his little box. But no, check him out.
Easier said than done.
It is easier said than done. Next up, we have Redhead Man, please.
Hey, folks. Got no socials to give you. Usually just kind of an enjoyment thing for me being online. I pop in from panels time to time whenever I get an invite. Shout out to Black Yamato for sending me to this invite. It was really fun. In regards to the subject topics, I think it's important that you do voice your... I do think it's important you voice your opinions in format of a protest, but I think it's more important and becomes more effective if you get out there and you actually find a candidate and get out there, go and work for them. Get out there, hit the campaign trail, regardless of your beliefs, whether you agree with me or not. You get a huge understanding of how our system actually works, what becomes effective, why violence isn't seen as effective nowadays, and you meet a lot of great people. So that's all I got for you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by. I know you've been gone for a while, so glad to have you back. I would say to check you out, but you didn't give any socials, so
nope.
So maybe check him out on my panel in the future, gang. So next up, last but not least, we have Ninetales, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wick. It was definitely the spiciest panel I've been on in a few. You know, I want to reiterate my apology to Todd. It wasn't fair to you to make my criticisms direct and personal. So these criticisms are now for everybody. So it's not meant to be like me reiterating my personal attack, but I am going to try to restate them in a less personal way. That kind of sounded like a cell phone, but it's not. So I think like the privilege when it comes to people talking about how we should protest versus someone like me talking about like what forms of protest shouldn't be limited. There's a privilege when people talk about, oh, well, they do things that I think are bad, and so that's the end of it. We're talking about the lives of groups of people that are so massively affected by the system that they feel the need to rise up against it to the degree that voting isn't enough, that just using their voice is enough, that nonviolence, well, okay, when I say nonviolence, I mean means of pressure, because we call violent protests everything down to like, you know, stopping loggers from cutting down a tree sometimes. So it depends on your perspective largely, but I really don't actually think a lot of the people who value protests based on the relative abstract damage that they perceive done to themselves care about the issues on the other side, care about the issues that affect the people protesting. You have to intrinsically not care about those things to want to do that. So here's my thing. The only reason you should oppose something like BLM is if you're a racist. Now, I'm not saying that because you oppose BLM, you're a racist. That's a different statement. But I think it's inherently contradictory, and here's why. If you don't like seeing BLM protesting in the streets, if you don't like seeing them rioting, you have two choices. You can demonize them and think about what it means to you, or you can get on the streets and fight with them. One of them takes getting over yourself. And yeah, sure, maybe your windows will be broken, but maybe you also have the ability to demand that they fix it. The overall thing though is, if you actually have sympathies for a lot of these causes, And not just like, oh, you know, I would do the same thing, but literally like, I don't want people to have to go through that because I like to think we don't live in a racist country, then supporting them is the way to get rid of this rhetoric, not blindly pushing back on it and thinking of every shortcut way you can to think about how awful protest is.
Tell people where they can find you.
Oh, yeah, I'm on Twitch. I already did the thing in chat, the shout-outs. That way people don't think it's the other Pokemon spelling of Ninetales. And sorry, yeah, just to drive my point home, if you don't like these things, you should be getting on the streets to help them fight their cause.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, Ninetales. You're always a wonderful guest, even if you get a little, especially perhaps because you were very passionate about your positions, and I do appreciate that. I appreciate all of you. To my audience, I appreciate you. We're going right out into Jason's Society. Thanks again for being here. You'll see me tomorrow with Kaylee Marie, Thursday with Dak Katie Doe, and then Friday with a bunch of individuals, so that'll be fun. So thank you for the bits, Better, Methodist, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Wave. Oh my, it takes forever. I do need to get this countdown done, but we will see. Give it a second. Give it a second.
Move.
I know. Yeah, just stay as still as possible, or they'll see you.
Did enjoy the conversation with you guys. It was great.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah, of course.